Are now live streaming to YouTube.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. This is the Senate Education Committee. Welcome. I'm Senator Ruth Ward from Senate District 8. Today, we will be holding a meeting of the Senate Education Committee. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting that we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As chair of the Education Committee, I find that the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note, there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to the meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone, with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch and/or listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. We have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there is a problem with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remote-senate@leg.state.nh.us or call 603-271-6931. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. With each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during the meeting, which is required under the right to know law. I will call the roll call. Senator Hennessy.
Good afternoon, Erin Hennessy from Littleton. My son is remote learning with me today and he will be in and out of the room.
Senator Ricciardi.
Good afternoon, Senator Ricciardi. I'm in my home in Bedford alone.
Senator Khan.
Present in Keene and my home. My wife is elsewhere in the house.
Senator Prentice.
Senator Prentice is at her home in West Lebanon. I'm at my home in West Lebanon, New Hampshire, and my husband is in the house. Thank you.
And Senator Ward, I am here in my house in Stoddard, and I am alone in the room. Okay, we're going to start with Senate Bill 147. And there are 4 parts to it, and I will tell you the 4 parts. The first one is applications for federal student aid, the central registry, the transportation of pupils, and mitigation of special education costs. We'll start with part 1, which will be introduced by Senator Prentice.
I think I'm, yeah.
I'll defer to Senator Khan. Thank you.
Do you have something, Senator Khan, on this bill?
Oh,
147?
yeah. Yes, I do.
Oh, I'm sorry. You are the sponsor of the bill.
Correct.
Okay.
And glad to also be the designee for Senate Bill 147. For the record, I'm Jay Kahn, Senator in District 10, representing 15 of 23 towns in Cheshire County. I offer part one of the bill related to the financial the free application for federal student aid, otherwise known as the FAFSA form. So if folks either reach into their deep past and recall filling these out themselves, or have loved ones that have gone off to college that you are familiar with this. The FAFSA is the form established by our federal government and the Department of Education for college students or students who are bound for a post-secondary education experience to complete and in order to qualify for federal financial aid need assistance. It's also then used by schools to evaluate the assistance that a student might qualify for from their institutions. So the FAFSA is a key to college entrance. And what we know about the FAFSA is that it is often the students who need financial assistance the most that are the most unlikely to apply for it. That's unfortunate because it is a key that could open a door of opportunity. The rate at which New Hampshire high school seniors are completing the FAFSA for entrance into post-secondary education in fall 20, New Hampshire ranked 30th with a completion rate of 58%. In other words, 42% of our high school seniors currently are not completing it. Coincidentally, and I say coincidentally because I don't think there's anything directly related, but it is coincidence that the latest college going rates for New Hampshire high school seniors was 57%. So it leads one to believe that it's very likely that college attendance and those attending are completing it. Those who are not, and maybe don't know that the opportunities that might exist for them to assist their costs through college. The way that the bill is structured is it anticipates that students are receiving some information from their schools about the FAFSA completion process. In fact, I think there are people here to testify today that there is a great deal of activity taking place in our high schools today. It expects that students who see themselves as potentially going on to a post-secondary experience from high school will complete it. Those who don't wish to complete it, there is a waiver for them to say, I'm aware of the FAFSA form, I don't wish to complete it. And that's the way that the family and the student could fill that, complete it. And then the school, third process is enabled that the school could sign off for the student that they were made aware but have not completed the form. So there are multiple ways to complete this. The bill currently says that this would be for implementation in the 22-23 school year. There's been some intervening action since this bill was written, taken by the federal government in the Budget Act that was approved in late December. As the Department of Education moves to enact the Lamar Alexander reform, he led the reform for the completion of the FAFSA down to 18 questions. And that reform is underway, but will not be in place until the 23-24 school year. So it's going to be a committee amendment that I offer, to Madam Chair, that would change that implementation date that begins on line 18 of section part 1 to reflect that beginning with the school year 2023-2024, that this is a better opportunity given the shorter form and the ease that's anticipated from the current form transitioning to the new. New Hampshire would not be alone in this action. And the first state to have done this was Louisiana. And Louisiana has raised its FAFSA completion rate to the second highest in the country at 78%. That remarkable number reflects that the state was very serious about trying to improve student opportunity for post-secondary education and was very concerned about the workforce capability of their graduating high school students. Since then, Illinois and Texas are both underway with implementations. And there are at least 10 other states that are also considering this action. So I think this is a good competitive move for New Hampshire to provide opportunity for our high school graduates and to provide the workforce that New Hampshire will need in the future. So with that, I'm certain that there are well-informed people signed up to offer testimony on this bill, but I'd be glad to take questions with one other notion, one other fact. While we had a 58% completion rate last year, what's being observed this year in our COVID environment is that completion rates are running 10% behind where they were. Hopefully that's a one-time thing, but the fact that fewer people are seeking the kind of financial aid and assistance that can unlock the door is disturbing and has a downside to New Hampshire's employers. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm glad to take questions from members of the committee.
Senator Ward, you're on mute.
Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Senator Khan. What I'd like to do is to have the different parts, the presenters for the different parts, introduce their bill and ask questions from the committee, and then I invite the public to testify.
Senator Ward, do you mind if Senator Bradley goes next so he can get to HHS?
Fine, Senator Bradley can go next. Senator Bradley?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I want to thank the bipartisan co-sponsors of Part 4 of this bill, and thank you for the courtesy to go first. It's a pretty simple bill. If you look on page 3 of Senate Bill 47, it adds lines 31 through 35 to the special education state aid section of law. Currently, if you look just above it on lines 28 through 31, each fiscal year, the state can designate $250,000 of funds which are already appropriated for emergency assistance. What my proposal would do is allow an additional $250,000 of special ed funds to be appropriated to small communities of 1,000 or fewer residents to mitigate, obviously, special ed costs and prevent significant financial harm to the community. So the reason why I've introduced this, and I suspect that other senators may have similar situations, a very small town in my district had a family move in with 2 or 3 special needs children that have caused significant financial harm to the community, to the point that property taxes, because of this one situation, are climbing precipitously. So it seems appropriate in the instances, at least to me, of these small towns, and the town in question was Hales location in Carroll County, that there be an additional $250,000 dedicated specifically to small communities when the impact it can be the worst. So thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to take any questions. I think Representative Anita Burrows may also further testify later.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? Yes, Mr. Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Bradley, for this. Just reading the wording, it says the state may designate an additional 250,000. Does that mean that the state is required, or that the state may designate up to 250 if it's not 250 that the town needs? Could you just expand upon that a little bit,
Yeah,
please?
so
Thank you.
I mirrored the language, Senator, in line 28. So it would allow, of the special catastrophic aid now, $250,000, it's already law designated, to be increased by another 250,000 for particular financial harm for small communities. It's not a mandate. It doesn't, there is discretion, as there is in the existing statute.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Bradley, for taking the question. Any idea how many towns we're talking about in New Hampshire? We've got 234 towns. How many have populations that are less than 1,000?
I suspect you have some in your area, Senator Khan. I suspect Senator Ward does. I suspect that Senator Ricciardi does. I know that Senator Hennessy does, and I suspect that Senator Prentice does. So I can't give you an exact number, but I would imagine that there are an awful lot of small towns of less than 1,000. There's no magic to the number 1,000. It just seemed that start there, see how it works. In my particular community of Hales location, it's much smaller than 1,000. So the magnitude of the crisis is magnified by their smallness.
I imagine, Senator, that this is likely to be covering the first $55,000 to $60,000 or so, that 3.5 times that the district is on the hook for 100%, as opposed to those costs that are above that the state covers 80 to 100%. Do you agree?
I don't know the answer to that, quite honestly.
All right, maybe we can ask somebody from the Department of Education where the gap truly
I will
exists.
just add this. When I first heard of this situation, I reached out to the Department of Ed, and they said, despite the fact that, in the last budget, we had fully funded CAT aid, their hands were tied. So that's where this amendment came in. It's obviously an emergency situation.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator Prentice?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Bradley, for bringing this forward. So there's 250,000 already. This is an additional, and I may have missed this. Do we know how much gets spent out of the 250 that already exists in statute?
I can't answer that. The department could answer that.
Beautiful. I'll certainly ask them. And it's at the discretion of the commissioner up to how much? would be
Yes,
spent?
that's correct, up to the cap. And it's mirrored after the existing statute, as I said in line 28, so.
You did. And thank you very much for taking my question, Senator Bradley. Appreciated.
We'll have people from the Department of Education, and they're here and they can answer those questions
All right,
later
thank
on.
you, Madam Chair. And now I have to get to education to HHS. So
Right.
if I can
Thank you.
leave
Thank
you,
you,
I
Senator
appreciate
Bradley.
it. Thank you.
Then we'll go back to part 2, which I will introduce. It's going to be very simple because I don't know very much about it, but we have Diana Fenton from the DOE, and she will go into it much more detail. But it has to do with a central registry and what happens with that. The central registry in the Department of Education to maintain records and under what circumstances those records are kept. And I expect Diana Fenton, who will be here, and she will talk about it in much more detail. Do we have Senator Waters to just give an introduction to the part 3, the transportation of pupils?
I think that's Senator. Khan.
Okay, we have Senator Khan for that. Then I have a wrong list because I have all kinds of names, and I'm sorry, Senator Khan, I didn't have your name for the first one. And I realized that when I printed this thing out, a whole section of the right side was eliminated.
Senator Warren, we'll give you an updated list right now, okay?
I think for the 147, I think we've managed it. So Senator Khan for part 3, relative to transportation.
Yes, Madam Chair. Part 3 it has to do with transportation of students for school-sponsored activities, but that are not related to daily attendance. These activities are defined here. Imagine that this is a class trip to a place out of state, the 8th grade Washington trip kind of experience. And this kind of transportation is not covered currently in statute. I will say that recently I've received communications that make me think that there is some additional definition needed to cover this. We want to make sure that the kind of transportation vehicle that we're talking about is in fact a 16-person vehicle, that people are properly licensed to operate a vehicle that is greater than 16 occupants or greater. And we want to make sure that the proper background checks are taken in accordance with RSA 189.13a. So there is an amendment that needs to be prepared, and I'm looking forward to the testimony here so that we can identify both the content and parties that we can bring together to make sure that we're giving the proper definition here to allow schools to do what they're already doing and do it properly and safely. Thank you, Madam Chair. There are people from, I would ask that we ask the business manager from SAU 29 to speak to this, who can put much more of a user's perspective to it, and also Ms. Bilecki from the Department of Transportation, from the Department of Safety and Motor Vehicles, who has assisted me and been a great guide on the content that's necessary for this.
Thank you, Senator Khan. Any questions from the committee members? Senator Rishardi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Khan. I'm glad you brought this up because I was questioning some of the language in 3. If I'm understanding it correctly, the way it's currently written, you would just really need a driver's license to partake in this, and that would be a detriment without the proper background checks and so forth.
I agree with your perspective, Senator, and we'll cure that for certain with the references to RSA 189.13a, which requires background checks for any contracted carrier of students.
Thank you.
Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Khan, for taking my question. Could you just expand a little upon what schools are doing now that they are not able to do, and what the actual fix is? Because I know students go on field trips now. So what is it? What is the difference that you're trying to help with?
To make sure that our statute provides that guidance and verification of how that is done with proper safety in place and permission.
Any other questions from the committee? Another Senator Hennessy.
Just a follow up. So are you trying to allow more types of transportation, or are you trying to ensure that what we do allow is safer and more restricted?
And I believe others, and this is why I think the business manager is in the best position to describe it, both from the contractual and the statutory language that schools need and use currently. But no, we just want to make sure that it's recognized in statute, because we've got a lot of words about transporting students, which we should have guidance about that, and that it's done in a proper and safe manner.
Thank you, Senator Khan. Well, that takes care of the introductions to the different parts. Now we can go to the public for their testimony. And if it would be nice if you could limit your testimony to 3, maximum 4 minutes, because we have a lot of people who like to talk. So who is handling the?
Senator Ward, do you want me to call on people by
Yes.
part by part?
Yes, that would be nice. And if somebody has something on something else and they're the same person, fine, go ahead.
Okay.
I have the
Let's
stop.
start with number 1.
I got the time.
If you wish to speak to part 1, please raise your hand. Okay, Joel Karstens.
Hello, thank you very much to the members of the committee for allowing our testimony today.
Yeah, you're welcome, Mr. Carstens. Go ahead.
I am speaking on behalf of Part 1 of SB 147. For the record, my name is Joel Karstens, and I am both the Director of Financial Aid at the University of New Hampshire, and I'm also the current president of the New Hampshire Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, also known as NAHASFA. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of both NAHASFA as well as the University System of New Hampshire in support of this bill. As you know, over the next decade, our state is facing declining numbers of high school graduates. You may also know that this smaller population of high school graduates will likely have a socioeconomic profile that historically suggests lower rates of post-secondary education enrollment and attainment. The next decade is also a time that we are all aware of when the need for New Hampshire workers with post-secondary degrees and credentials has never been higher and is increasing rapidly. Leaving behind students who both need post-secondary degrees and credentials for personal success and that the New Hampshire economy requires for a strong and vibrant economy to be strong and vibrant is not an option. Both the university system and NAHASFA support efforts such as SB 147 to make the pursuit and attainment of post-secondary degrees and credentials part of a comprehensive and coordinated financial literacy strategy for New Hampshire. With that support expressed, I do want to address one thing that Senator Khan noted in his opening statement regarding this section. Both the university system and the NAHASFA members see that this bill could be improved by making one common sense change and moving the implementation from 2022 to 2023. So from the 2022-23 to 23-24 school year. As Senator Khan stated very eloquently, changes are in place to simplify the free application for federal student aid that will begin with the 2023-24 academic year. As a financial aid administrator and as representing a group of financial aid administrators, we know that when changes of this magnitude occur, that those changes will likely come with bumps and bruises that oftentimes students will feel more so than institutions or the U.S. Department of Education. So we would applaud and certainly support delaying the implementation for 1 year to allow the federal government to implement this in a more seamless manner, to work through any of the issues that might occur during an initial year, as well as to provide both the New Hampshire Department of Education and the public schools opportunities to properly prepare and implement the necessary systems that will track these requirements at the state and local level. In summary, completing a FAFSA is a positive step that each high school graduate with post-secondary intentions and those who may be on the fence, particularly due to financial concerns, can complete. The University System of New Hampshire and NAHASFA stand ready to continue our support of FAFSA completion and Granite Staters post-secondary education pursuit and attainment. I am happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carstens. Any questions from committee members? No questions. Thank you so much.
Next, we have Debbie.
Welcome, Debbie. Debbie, you are recognized.
She appears to be unmuted, Senator, so I'm not sure.
Well, we'll try the next one and see if Debbie will come back.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised for part one. So Senator, would you like to move on to part two? Oh,
absolutely, sure.
Oh, we got a hand. I think this is for part one, Christiana Thornton.
Christiana, welcome. You are muted.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, go ahead.
This is Christiana Thornton. I'm president of the New Hampshire Higher Education Assistance Foundation. Thank you for your patience. This is my first time testifying in this Zoom environment. So thank you for your patience. So I am with a nonprofit organization here in New Hampshire that is based in Concord. And our sole purpose is to really encourage students in their pursuit of higher education. And we are very excited about the opportunity to work with Senator Khan on this. Like Senator Khan's comment earlier, and in terms of what Joel had also said, we would also support pushing out the effective date to a later time. And really, I think from my perspective, if we're going to move forward with this and that requirement, we want to make sure that we as a community of nonprofit organizations, individuals working with schools have the opportunity to really create that safety net to make sure that when that process starts, that we are well prepared to support students and families across the state of New Hampshire. Right now, we work very closely with every school district in the state of New Hampshire in giving resources and information to school counselors, which ultimately really help to provide some of that support to students as they're trying to kind of get to that next step in their education. As an organization, we also provide free FAFSA counseling. In this remote environment, we've actually been able to work with more students across the state because we now can meet with them at their dining room table via Zoom, where we can kind of come alongside them and talk through any questions, concerns they might have. Often it can be a very scary, overwhelming process. I think anyone who has completed this process recognizes that it can be overwhelming. And so organizations like ours and again, school counselors, those working with our New Hampshire colleges and universities really play a critical role in coming alongside the state in providing that information to make that process as seamless as possible. So I think, our point today was to say there is an infrastructure in place that is already working to help to support families and students through this process. Our goal would be to work with the legislature to ensure that we can come alongside and to provide the enhancement of our services along with those of our colleagues across the state. I don't know if you have any questions about the sort of the process or, happy to answer any questions that I can.
Okay, thank you very much, Christiana Thornton. Senator Jay Kahn has a question for you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Thornton and Mr. Karstens, both for being present today. Your service on behalf of our students is very appreciated. I'm wondering, Ms. Thornton, are there online financial literacy courses that, or just instruction that's available to our schools and our students and parents currently?
Yeah, so there's a lot of resources that are out there. I would say there's a lot of different tools in the toolbox that exist today. I really think part of this is raising awareness and making sure that those resources are known to New Hampshire students in their pursuit. The U.S. Department of Education has spent a considerable amount of time more recently thinking about getting those resources in the hands of students in a virtual manner. Once our understanding is the new FAFSA form goes live, that there will be other types of webinars and seminars that would be available to kind of walk students and families through that process. Obviously, we as an organization will do live presentations, typically in schools and meeting with families, and we'll do the in-person meetings one-on-one where we can actually sit down and help them to fill out the form. I think moving forward, we anticipate that there will continue to be a lot of education and training that's available because ultimately, we want every student to complete the FAFSA so that we sort of overcome that initial barrier. Unfortunately, if you do not complete the FAFSA form, and you don't get it done by the deadline, you are not able to pursue federal student aid, both grants and loans. And, our goal is often just making sure that people know if this is something you're interested in pursuing, you want to make sure that you've done that step because if you don't, there is a deadline, there's a process, and that information is out there. I know that's a long-winded answer, but I hope that helps.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton. Any other, Senator Prentice?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and Ms. Thornton, thank you for testifying today. So just quickly, do you support this, or do you feel that with the new FAFSA coming into place and the help that your agency already gives, that this is covered? I wasn't quite sure, or are you neutral?
We've been neutral on the bill. I would say I think the amendment that Senator Kahn talked about would really be a positive in making sure that we're giving the time. I think when I had spoken with Senator Kahn, my concern was, we're fully in support of the legislation and recognizing that we want to overcome any barrier that exists to students going off to college. I was a little bit concerned about our ability to sort of ramp up to make sure that if we're going to have a requirement in place, that we're also coming alongside and providing all of the tools and resources to students to be able to complete that. And so with the proposal that he's brought forward today, I think that that would give organizations like us, the colleges and universities and school counselors, the opportunity to come together to have the time to create sort of that infrastructure to support those students, and making sure that when you make that a requirement, that we are also coming alongside and saying, yes, there is this new requirement, but we are going to help you in achieving that goal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thornton. Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next.
So Senator Ward, it looks like we have Debbie back, so I'm going to bring her in again.
Okay. Debbie, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I had a little technical glitch there, so my apologies. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm Debbie Skiri. I'm the president of New Hampshire College University Council, and I am testifying in support of SB 147, speaking mostly just to relative to the student aid portion of that bill. By way of background, the NHCUC is a nonprofit consortium of the public and private institutions of higher ed in our state. And these institutions are recognized and highly regarded for their outstanding teaching, research, and community service activities. They serve as major centers of activity that are vital to the economic development of the community and our state. College access and success is a strategic priority of the NHCUC. And SB 147 promotes the completion of FAFSA, as we've learned earlier, by a parent or a student as a prerequisite to high school graduation. In order to encourage more students to apply and attend college, it is important to remove barriers, as other folks have mentioned, including the financial ones. The New Hampshire College University Council strongly supports increasing the number of students attending college, and attaining a college degree is an important foundation for stability and earning potential. And at the same time, our state and businesses benefit from educated folks in our workforce. And completing a FAFSA form gives access to student aid, mitigating an important challenge, probably one of the most important challenges that many students and their families confront trying to attend college and universities. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to try to respond to any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Debbie. Do we have any questions from members of the committee? I don't see one, so thank you very much for your testimony.
You're quite welcome.
Okay, I don't see any other hands for part one. So at this time, if you wish to speak to part two, please raise your hand. And if you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by dialing *9.
We should have Diana Fenton from the OE.
We do.
Ms. Fenton, you're muted.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you, Senator Ward and members of the committee. Thank you, Senator Ward, for working with the department to sponsor this bill. I think when Senator Ward said that a lot of people like to hear themselves talk, I think she was talking about me directly, so I will do my best. But every once in a while, that law degree gets in my way. So this bill goes with another bill that Senator Khan has graciously sponsored for the department. Currently, by way of relevant background, when the department issues a teaching credential, we do not run a criminal background check on an applicant. That's not part of our process. Senator Khan's bill, we've been working closely with him over the last few years to change that. And this bill before you, which the department has presented an amendment to, this bill would take it one step further. And what this bill does is when someone applies to be a teacher, in addition to having their criminal background check run, the department would have access to the Central Registry of DCYF. The Central Registry of DCYF contains abuse and neglect findings of people who cannot have access to children. The department's role would be limited only to findings of abuse, not neglect. The concern from the department, and the reason we want to bring this bill forward, is we feel that if one state agency has made a finding that individuals should not and are not safe to be around children, we want to be very certain that individuals do not find another avenue, i.e. the Department of Education, by which they would gain access to children. This bill did not come to me out of a stroke of genius. This bill came to me because we had an individual who was on the Massachusetts Central Registry, on their severe abuse offender list, to be exact, came to New Hampshire and got a license to teach. That's potential to teach. So we have worked with our partners at DHHS and DCYF. In particular, I want to thank Attorney Rebecca Ross, who I know is on this meeting. She's available to answer any questions. We worked very closely with her. As I mentioned, we do have an amendment which we submitted, and I believe the committee will be getting that shortly. But we've created within the education laws a new section, 189.13D, which would correspond with running the criminal background check for licensing. And it would be the steps we take to check the central registry when a new teaching applicant comes forward. We've also amended RSA 169.30 C35, which is the central registry law. So we've amended both portions so that they will come together. I worked with, as I mentioned, Attorney Rebecca Ross to address some of these issues. To highlight, we're asking for some rulemaking authority so that we can work with our state agency partner to create how this will all come together. It will be very limited and the records will be confidential. And we are only looking for the abuse findings, not the neglect findings. We wanted to make that very clear. If a name comes up as being on that registry, a credential will be denied. However, within the law and within our rules, we are providing for a right to appeal that denial. Along with that, the department would have the ability to gain access to the reports at the DC registry to support the denial, and all reports would be kept. The confidentiality would be maintained. I'm happy to take any questions. I know I gave you a lot of information in a short period of time.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm looking at the amend, or at least the language that you're wishing to turn into an amendment. And I want to make sure that I understand secure system for accessing finding of abuse for individuals on the registry so the finding of child abuse and neglect pursuant to RSA 169. So I wasn't sure if your testimony it was trying to parse out different conditions for being on this registry for abuse and neglect. I think that's something I just want to understand what the intent is, and then if the words are actually covering that.
Sure, thank you for the question. So I believe you're looking at the portion that would amend RSA 21 and 9.
Yes.
Roman F. All right. So it does say, as you said, establishment and implementation of a secure system for accessing findings of abuse. Let's stop right there. We decided in working with Attorney Ross that what would be appropriate for DOE purposes would be to really limit it to those findings of abuse. There have been instances where people were neglectful. There was a finding of neglect, and then they've rectified that, right? They've addressed the issues and they've moved on. And we want to be really narrowly tailored in what we're going after here. We don't want to cast a very wide net. We want to be really careful about that. So at this point, we're limiting it to findings of abuse. I think as you continue with the sentence, for individuals on the Central Registry of Child Abuse and Neglect, my interpretation of that, Senator Khan, was that's the title of the registry. I think to the point that it's, to the extent it's confusing, we can just say on the central registry and perhaps eliminate the rest of the title. But I'll continue our partnership with Rebecca Ross and see if we can address that. I hope that answers your question.
It explains why the confusion, and I think you caught the importance of that. Thank you.
Senator Hennessy?
Thank you. Could you, Madam Chair, could you make sure that everyone gets that amendment? I do not have that amendment, so I don't have the ability to reflect upon what Ms. Fenton is speaking about right now.
Sure. Do you have it, Ava?
Sorry, I'm muted. So yes, Senator Hennessy, it is in the OneDrive folder under SB 147. And it's under the title NHDOE amendment.
Senator Prentice, you have a question?
I have a question for Diana Fenton, Madam Chair. Diana, thank you for testifying today. So I just almost want to go back to the beginning where it talks about conducting criminal background checks. Is that an FBI compliant criminal background check for first-time applicants? What's the threshold coming in the door?
Yes, thank you for your question. I don't know if you can hear the banging behind me. If you can, I apologize. It's the state work. So every once in a while, my heater likes to talk to me. So I apologize for that. Yeah, so great question. The criminal background check, as I mentioned, that is in large thanks to legislation passed last session. Thank you to Senator Khan for that. That is, Senator Prentice, a FBI background check and a New Hampshire state background check. And we've worked very closely with our partners at the Department of Safety. And still working to pass legislation this session to implement that. But yes, it is an FBI and a New Hampshire state check.
Okay. Just a quick follow-up. Biometric?
Follow-up? Senator Prentice has a follow-up question for you, Diana.
Sorry, Diana, I should have asked you this the first time, and I appreciate that Senator Khan worked on this last year. So is it biometric? Is it the FBI compliant background check with the biometric data?
I'm not familiar with that term, Senator Prentice. I apologize.
So it is
fingerprints?
It's a unique scan of the fingerprints.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a fingerprint check. I think your term is a lot more complicated than mine, but yeah, it's just a fingerprint check on the live scan machine. But yes, you and I are on the same page. Thank you.
Yeah, it connects registry to registry. Okay, so I just wanted to be clear on that coming through the door. Thank you very much. Question answered.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee members? Okay, then I have one question for you, Ms. Fenton. Looking at part 2, the original piece, and looking at your additions here, are you intending to totally scrap what's there, and what you have sent us will be to replace all in that section? Is that right?
I don't think the amendment totally scraps anything. I was lucky enough to coordinate with Attorney Ross and flush it out a little bit more. I think the significant thing to the amendment was just creating that new section of RSA 18913D.
Mm-hmm.
Working on 18913A with Senator Khan, I realized that it's such a quagmire. And so I tried to separate things out. And that's what occurred to me yesterday as I was crafting this, is that we wanted it to just be very clear which each section was supposed to address. And that's why I created this new section. I think it also flushes out what is listed in RSA 21N9. 21N9 is very generic language that is appropriately contained within that. That is our generic rulemaking authority at the Department of Ed. But this is a significant step forward for the Department of Education. We've never had this tool before. I think it's important for child safety, but I think the law needs to be clear what we are aiming at and for. And that's why I created that new section. In 169C35, that was part of the original bill. And again, working with our partners, we were able to flush that language out a little bit. You'll see if you scroll down, we added paragraphs Roman numeral 8 and 8A to just talk about what the department would have access to.
Mhm. Okay, then I see a whole page with a 2, upon receipt by the Department of Written Requests, and it goes on 2, 3, and 4. Is that something that you have added also?
Yes, if we're looking at the same.
I'm looking
section.
at the 3 pages that you sent.
Yes. Yes, that is it in its entirety, the 3 pages.
So the second page and the third page should be part of the amendment.
I'm sure the legislative drafters at LBA will not want that to be part of the amendment. That's just the language in its entirety, and I'm sure they will remove that and just add those amended paragraphs at the bottom. But I didn't want to be that presumptuous.
Okay, I'll work on it. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Ms. Fenton.
Thank you for your time.
Who is next?
I don't see any other hands for part 2 of Senate Bill 147. So at this time, if you would like to speak to part 3 of Senate Bill 147, please raise your hand. And if you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. Director Elizabeth Bilecki.
Good afternoon, Ms. Bilecki.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. How is your afternoon going so far? So far, so good. I see the head mask. Perfect. Thank you for an opportunity to speak. I wanted to share with you that the department takes a neutral position on this particular bill. Can you hear me loud enough? Okay, perfect. We are taking a neutral position. We do believe it's going to be a matter of legislative policy of how you want to proceed with this proposal. Currently, the department oversees the enforcement and regulation of all of school buses and school bus companies. Because this regulation includes private chartered buses, that will fall outside of our enforcement and regulation. Just to give you a quick recap of what we do with school transportation, we really oversee and audit all of the transportation providers in the states, the buses themselves, including performing safety inspections on those, and we oversee driver certification and training. I know Senator Khan and I have discussed some of proposed amendments to this bill that would strengthen his position on this as well. And some of the things that we've discussed is really narrowing the scope of the proposal to truly include just the buses and no other transportation, such as private vehicles, such as Ubers or others. So I'm happy to work with him on the proposal that will limit it to vehicles that carry passengers of 16 passengers or more. Another thing that's outside of the scope of the current proposal is the fingerprinting or background checks on the drivers of the private buses as well. And I know that's something that he's contemplating to add to the proposed legislation as well. As far as other differences between what we currently do with the oversight of school transportation and the proposed legislation, that will really fall on the responsibility of the school districts and the superintendents to kind of look and compare the oversight and look to see how they would want to fill the gaps with proposed or potential contractual provisions. I think I've covered all of that. Well, I guess one more point that I would like to make is that the proposal is limited to school-related activities and absolutely would not be applicable to home to school or school to home transportation. So with that, I thank you for your time and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Bilecki. Any questions from one of the committee members? I don't see one. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, we have 3 more speakers for this part. So next I will call on Tim Rohr.
Hi, Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Rohr.
Thank you
Go ahead.
for taking my testimony. I thought that Senator Hennessy had a very good question earlier, and I hope I can shed some more light on that as to what's the purpose? What are we trying to do with this legislation? Currently, and many of you on the committee live to and represent districts to the west side of the state. And often our field trips, sport teams, class trips are of enormous length in time. For Keene to play Division I football, for example, many of their trips are over an hour and a half, some 2 hours for a football game. And if you look around the state or you go to your local games, you'll see charter buses parked in the parking lot transporting students. If you had a son or daughter who participated in the trip going to DC, they went on a charter bus. These are the type of luxury coaches with bathrooms, Wi-Fi, storage for materials and luggage under the bus. That's happening now. But currently, your district, your communities are at risk, because if they do this and there is a problem, the state does not allow that as a mode of transportation for those purposes currently. So it's fine that everyone's doing it, even though it's not legal. If there's a problem, there's going to be great liability. And that is why I find this bill so compelling. I've stopped my district here, I've been here for 20 years, from using these modes of transportation. But it is a long way to ride to the Museum of Science without a bathroom for kindergartners, going from Stoddard when my kid attended there, for example. It is a difficult thing to have to take 3 buses across the state to play football, because your luggage takes up an entire bus. For example, all the equipment that you need. It's just not practical. And what we're doing now is just ignoring the regulation. It's not allowable. So I would like to, and I appreciate and thank Senator Khan for bringing this important legislation up. We aren't trying to take away what school buses or the Department of Safety is doing to protect our students. What we're doing is trying to be practical on what common sense changes need to be made to let a very rural state be able to get to where they need to be in a safe manner on a vehicle that makes sense for those type of trips. No one's going to take a school bus to Washington, D.C., but you're not allowed to take a charter bus currently. So let's think about what those things are. I believe Senator Khan has some ideas for how to amend this. We do not want any less stringent controls on driver selection, driver requirements. That's not what this is about. It's about being able to take a large vehicle with a large number of students, with a bathroom, with facilities that make sense. I mean, if you have a student that plays sports in our town, you might be on a bus for 6 to 7 hours a week. Not to and from, I mean for extracurricular. Could you imagine being able to do your homework on the Wi-Fi that's provided on a charter bus, for example? Those kind of things. I'll take questions if that would be appropriate, Chairperson Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Orr, for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple. And thanks, Mr. Rohr, for calling to our attention what is a liability concern for school districts. Do you believe that in this COVID-related time that, if you're in a school bus and you have restroom breaks, I assume you're doing that with meals and stops along the way. It seems that that these kinds of trips, multiple hours, that having a bathroom on a bus is pretty important to as a safety and health, limiting those risks. Would you agree?
I agree. And it's a funny story. My daughter didn't make it to the rest stop in 4th grade out of Chesterfield School District on a yellow bus. But I bet you if you think back to what you've seen in your own district or with your own students. If you have kids, you'll remember a time when they were on a charter bus for one of these purposes. I think that most schools break the rules and use them.
And if, Madam Chair, if I could continue with one other question.
Certainly, go ahead.
I assume that in your contractual agreements that this wouldn't just be pick up the phone and call, Concord Transportation, that you in fact would likely enter into an agreement with a carrier in which you could specify certain RSA requirements like 189.13a to assure that when they're assigning drivers, they're properly licensed, they've had criminal history background checks of recent, in the same manner that other contract drivers do for ordinary, for school transportation, right?
Yes, I think you're right. And I think you speak to that pretty eloquently in the language, and I think that can be strengthened. I think that's really important. I agree, 100%. And we do contract in that regard now, meaning they have to have background checks, because we're required to have background checks for all contractors that are going to be working or alone with students currently.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rohr. Any other questions from the committee? I don't see one. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sonia, do we have another one?
Yep, we have two more. Our next speaker is calling in on the phone. So if they could identify themselves and to unmute, you dial *6.
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Stinson. I am the Vice President for Student Transportation of America. And I just want to say, in consideration of Mr. Rohr's comments and with proper qualifying amended language by the examples given, it sounds like, based on what I read and interpreted, it was, I'm taking it out of context. So it sounds like these are for, although potentially, they are school-sponsored events, they pertain more to long distance and trips that would take vehicles outside of a normal school bus routing and assigned sports trips and associated usage of school bus. Again, it sounds like everybody here is all pretty much on the same page as it relates to not compromising standards as it relates to school bus driver qualification, licensing, drug tests, background checks, all of that. The only thing I would mention is we all know is the school bus is the safest mode of transportation, and students are certainly 70 times more likely to get to school safely when taking a bus than traveling in non-school bus vehicles. But again, with respect to Mr. Rohr's comments, certainly understand that use should be permitted, for especially interstate travel and things of those kind of trips of that nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? I don't see one. Thank you for your testimony.
Next, we have Mark Raposo.
Mark, welcome, and go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Mark Raposo, and I work for community transportation out of Jaffrey, New Hampshire, servicing both the Jaffrey Range and the Messina school districts. I am also president of the New Hampshire School Transportation Association. Although we have not been able to have a board meeting on this topic due to the fact that we didn't have time and we require a 10-day notice. I have had some discussions with 10 counterparts, and we do share a number of concerns in regards to this. Although I'm hearing that it has to do with coach buses and long trips, I'm not seeing that in this bill. What I'm seeing is that this would mean that any extracurricular activity could be used with any type of vehicle. This would mean that the driver would not have to be rostered through the Department of Safety. They would not have to be criminally background checked through the Department of Education and all the training, etc. We work very closely with the Department of Safety to ensure that our drivers and vehicles meet the standards that are required to safely transport students. If we were talking about a coach bus going to Washington, DC, I get it. I hear that. That's not what I see in this bill. In this bill, I can take and purchase, and another company could start up if they so choose. They could purchase a bunch of old school buses that are camp buses, put the word charter on them, and they could utilize those for providing any transportation for extracurricular activities for school districts. They could do this without their drivers being rostered. They could do it without criminal background checks, even if you put that in the Department of Ed ruling. It's just extremely concerning that it is so broad. It is not limited. If it said for any transportation on a coach bus outside of New England, I get it. Other than that, I think we are operating with two sets of standards, one set of standards for home to school and one set of standards for those that are not home to school, the extracurricular. This would mean tech runs, going from school to school. That is not home to school. That would mean, as of right now, you could utilize drivers that have an operator's license. If we even want to go with 16 passenger vehicles, if you go with 16 passenger vehicles and up, yes, they're going to have a CDL-C for a minibus and a CDL-B. They would not have to have an S endorsement. That's a school bus endorsement. They would just have to have a passenger. But what that would also mean is the driver would only have to have a driver's license for that particular vehicle. Now, when I want to bring on a driver as a school bus driver, we have to send a roster up to the Department of Safety, Pupil Transportation. They then do a driving background and a criminal background, and they deny a lot of drivers. What this would mean is that wouldn't have to happen. So all the rejects that we can't hire to do home to school are now eligible to do extracurricular. So I'm just extremely concerned that this is taking all the controls and the safety that we have at the Department of Safety Pupil Transportation and throwing them out the window. And I'm sorry to be long-winded.
We're good.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee members? Mr. Raposo, we've heard you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Senator Ward, Tim Rohr has raised his hand, I think, to speak for a second time. Do you want me to bring him in?
Sure. Mr. Rohr.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and sorry to raise my hand again, but I just want to follow up. This is an important bill to me, but I do not disagree with the last two presenters. In fact, we know we need to work on that part of it. Our intention is to not make the driver have any less requirements than the driver of the school bus. Roster drivers would be wonderful with us if the Department of Safety would allow that. But in fact, I have negotiated this very language in anticipation. 2 years ago, when I started negotiating the contract, I put in there that my current provider would reimburse me for runs over 90 miles away for a charter bus. So the intent really is this charter bus for necessary long trips and group trips. It's not to take business away or make it less safe. So I'm sure Senator Khan wants to make those amendments, and I really appreciate the comments, but the intention is common sense, not to limit the safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Khan.
Yeah, Mr. Rohr and Mr. Raposo, we heard some important clarifications that are being sought, and I assume, Mr. Rohr, you'd be willing to work with me and Mr. Raposa to try to bring the thoughts together on this. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Rohr?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
There was a hand, but I think it went down. So I think that might be everyone for part 3. I think we might be ready to move on to part 4.
Okay, great.
So please raise your hand now if you would like to speak to part 4 of Senate Bill 147. So I'm not seeing any hands. There was one other name on my original sign-in sheet that signed up to speak, Lori Young, but I don't see her here. And I don't see any hands raised. So, Tim Rohr has raised his hand again. Senator, not sure. Do you want to bring him in for a third
Does
time?
Mr. Rohr have something quick to say?
Well, I was wondering if I could speak to part 4.
Oh. That
would be okay?
Yep.
I've been a business administrator for 20 years. And one of the things, I don't want to speak in favor or against this provision, but I do want to point out to Senator Bradley, and he may already know this, but we do have catastrophic aid or special ed aid, as you know. And Senator Khan did speak to the 3.5 times. But one of the things that many folks don't know that was pioneered in this part of the state was the ability to borrow against future earnings on that, because you have the expenses this year for a move-in, like Senator Bradley testified, but you don't have the money this year to pay for it. You don't get paid until next year. And there is a provision in the law that allows for catastrophic aid borrowing, and the state pays the interest on that. So I just wanted to let the committee know that that does exist currently. And so if you had a student that cost $300,000, your amount would be something like $85,000, and the rest would come from the state in the next year. You can borrow against that future earning. A little known provision that hasn't been used in several years, but I've used it many times for our small communities here. That's all.
Senator Khan.
Thank you. And thank you for, I was not aware of that. So just to understand it a second further, the borrowing is against your future receipt from the Department of Education. It's not literally a borrow at risking the credit of the district, right?
Yeah, you borrow from a bank and it's against future receipts. So you do borrow from a bank, there is interest. The state pays that interest and it doesn't come out of your regular catastrophic funds.
Yeah, if I could, Madam Chair, could you provide us I assume there's statutory language on that?
I could, I'll send that to you. I'll send that to the committee.
Thank you.
That would be great.
Thanks.
I know some small towns that could use it if they had known about it. Thank you very much, Mr. Rohr. Senator Hennessy.
Thank you. I just have a follow-up question. So if a community is to borrow against their future earnings, but the expense continues on for, say, 12 years, how does that actually help the community?
Well, it does actually help once you get on the borrowing. So let's say you're going to earn, you can imagine, you have a family move in this year, unbudgeted, and in a small school. Maybe you have $1 million budget and you have a family move in and it costs you $100,000 for that student. You don't have the money this year to pay it, and you're not going to get the revenue till next year. So you would borrow those funds simply. So you do not go into debt this year, and you just stay on that train. So the next, you borrow every year then. So you're always getting a year in advance. So next year you would get 100,000 from the state, you would borrow 100,000 again. And you have to stay on that train. You do have to raise the taxes by $100,000 because you have this new expense. And then when the student moves out or ages out, you will not borrow, you will not have the expense, you'll pay off the loan. What it does is it keeps you from going into debt, or if you're in a small district and you have many in your area, that first year is very traumatic when you don't have it budgeted. And so if you, let's say, realistically, you have $400,000 for a small community, they would have to put a deficit article on for $400,000 in the current year, and they would be raising the budget next year up to the number, which you've probably seen in your own districts, really catapults the tax rate. So this just smooths that out. But if you had a person move in and move out every other year, the borrowing is not really super realistic. But for a small district where there's one student that comes and stays for a few years, it really works very well. I've done it successfully in Nelson, Chesterfield, and Westmoreland for multiple years, and haven't done it for about 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Rohr. Senator Khan?
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Rohr. I appreciate Senator Hennessy's question as well, but want to, just as I understand the reimbursement process, it's always 1 year in arrears. So this borrowing would seem to be necessary if there was a K through 12 student in a district. That first year, the borrowing would be necessary. That in all future years, you'd be receiving the sufficient funds to cover the expense, the catastrophic aid portion of the expense via the Department of Education's distribution for special education enrollments.
It seems like that, but so if I borrowed 100,000 this year, next year I have the bill for 100,000 plus the note due for 100,000. So you just stay on the borrowing until the expense goes away. I find you don't have to, but that's what I've done in the past.
So you'll carry that same dollar amount for the duration of the child's education, but it doesn't increase beyond that initial borrowing.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rohr. A lot of good information. Any other questions? No more hands? That concludes the
No, I'm
hearing.
sorry. Senator Ward, I'm sorry, there is someone else. I thought you were talking about questions. We have Rebecca Fredette.
Okay. Ms. Fredette, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Fredette. I'm the State Director of Special Education at the New Hampshire Department of Education. Sorry, speaking pretty quickly. I just get to my office. So I did want to just speak briefly to this legislation for Part 4 because it does involve the special education funds, aid funds that we put out to districts each year. And those funds are put out based on either 3.5 times the per pupil cost that districts incur or 10 times the per pupil cost that districts incur. And we reimburse them for those funds through submission of their documentation that they've paid these. By not appropriating funds to this legislation, what would happen is that we would be taking this $250,000 out of the appropriation for special education aid and putting it into this fund to support these schools, and which is great that we want to support the schools, but since 2008, this is the first time that we've been able to pay out those ratios of 80% or 3.5 times and 10 times to districts with the allocations that we've been given. So we have not had enough funds that are allocated to us to be able to pay out what we're already asked to pay out. So we would be taking an additional $250,000 out of what we are asked to pay out. And so that would be of concern just because we try to make sure that we give the districts back as much as we can in that special education aid area. And then typically, if there are any excess funds, these funds would go into our court-ordered placements, which are always also returned back to districts to try to help them with some of those higher costs that they incur. So we just wanted to make a statement regarding that, and I am available for any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions from the committee members? Senator Hennessy.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming to testify today. So I just want to be clear, what you're saying is that there needs to be some sort of amendment here to actually appropriate those funds?
I think that it would work. I'm not telling you what to do, but I am saying that we're already taking from a fund that we already typically don't have enough in. It's kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul almost. So if we were to do this, I think it would be more beneficial to the districts if we made it a separate fund so that we could support them this way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you, Ms. Fredette.
Is there anyone else that wanted to speak to Senate Bill 147?
Nobody else. Thank you very much. This concludes the hearing on SB 147. We will now move over to SB 148. And I will introduce that. The SB 148 consists of 5 different sections. The first one has to do with vocational rehabilitation. Second has to do with career and technical education. Number 3, emergency plans for sports-related injuries. Number 4, private post-secondary career schools. And 5, environmental and outdoor education and establishing the New Hampshire Youth Environmental Education and Conservation Council. What I'd like to have is the prime sponsors for each section give a short introduction and answers and the questions from the committee members, and we go through that, and at the end we'll have questions and input from the public. So number 1 is mine, Senator Ward. It is a request from the Department of Education. Let's see, that has to do with a lot of repealing sections, and the ones who are not repealed are giving a different content. So I will ask Lisa Hatz, is she there? And before I go any further, I am going to check on the prime bill that I have to sponsor. So I will ask Senator Hennessy if she will take over the virtual gavel and proceed. So
Thank you.
Over to have maybe Lisa Hatz from the DOE to talk to this part 1.
She is. Do you want me to bring in her now, or did you want the rest of the senators to introduce their primes?
Have the rest of the senators introduce.
Okay. Shall I bring?
Thank you.
There'll be.
Yes, please bring in Senator Waters.
Yeah, and I think he will do 2 and 5 together.
Senator Waters, you're muted. There you go.
We all set now?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senator David Waters, District 4, and I'm here to introduce part 2 relative to career and technical education. If it's possible for me after this one to introduce my other part, it would help because like Senator Ward, I got to get over at HHS at some point. So this bill addresses our highly successful career and technical education system. The bill comes to you from Eric Froworth, who we're going to hear from, who's the statewide director in DOE of this career and technical education. and also from the Career and Technical Education Advisory Council, which offers recommendations and considerations of all things career and technical education. Much of the bill has to do with language changes that are necessitated by, clarifications and some statutory issues related to Perkins funding from the federal government, which funds this system. So I'll just go through those, and then I will focus a little bit on a couple of policy parts as well. So first off, you'll see that we are clarifying that students who attend private schools or home schools, that what their sending district is. And this is because they can take part in career and technical education programs, whether they are in public school, private school, or homeschooled, and it just clarifies what is their sending district to their regional career and technical center. The next part deals with the practice of renovation and construction of CTE centers. We are on about a 20-year cycle whereby building career and technical education centers get constructed or renovated. And it's become clear as this cycle is going on that some school districts decide that it really is just time, because of their plans, to build a whole new school, or rather than renovate, to tear down and construct. So what we've done here, as you'll see in the bold, is say not just renovation, but expansion or replacement. I neglected to make sure that we followed through on that language in other parts of the bill you have before you. So there is an amendment which just makes sure that that phrase on this page and also on page 3 is consistent. On page 3, we do get into a couple of policy issues, which I will explain. As I mentioned, that you have receiving schools. These are school districts that have their own career and technical education centers, and those school districts that don't are part of consortium, and they can send their students to those programs. There have been a couple of difficulties with that because of transportation and tuition costs for the sending schools. Some of the sending districts are putting the number of students who can go. We're trying to address that in 2 ways. First, just to assert, I think, something that should be quite obvious, that New Hampshire students have a right to a career and technical education, just like they have a right to an adequate education. And this would clarify that it is really the intent of the legislature that if somebody wants to take one of these programs, which is going to get them in the workforce and the credentials to do it, that they shouldn't be deprived of that just because of where they live. But then recognizing the responsibility of the state, it clarifies the funding of that tuition and transportation reimbursements to the local districts. And we do have a set amount of reimbursement and the transportation costs that are budgeted each year. And this just clarifies that the intent of the legislature that the Department of Education does fulfill its obligation there, so that those schools aren't hesitant to send their students to the receiving school. Now, of course, this bill sets policy, but each year it is in finance. Well, I mean, every other year the budget determines just exactly how much money is going to go into tuition and transportation, and then it gets prorated. So that, we can in a policy bill preempt that, but it just sends instructions to finance that if, that this funding, here's what we need, and that's where that is. If we can turn to the next page, you'll see that there is some just cleaning up of some language about the projects qualified for their renovation, expansion, and construction, and takes out really a kind of extraneous number 2 that's on line 13 of page 4, except students from sending schools, because that's dealt with elsewhere, and it just renumbers the rest of that. The next part here addresses a longstanding issue of trying to help that we would have school counselors more aware of CTE programs. We've been concerned that, counselors are often so focused on four-year college that they don't recognize that many students would greatly benefit from CTE programs and the pathways that CTE programs provide into great careers and then credentialing and programs in our community colleges and in our four-year colleges later on. So what this would do is add a high school counselor from ascending school district to the advisory council that we have, and then clarifies the appointment of that person. We think that will really help in the schools. And then this piece, which perhaps Senator Khan will speak to at some point on page 5. We had Senator Khan's bill last year. The Department of Education needs rulemaking in terms of establishing this career readiness credential, which we approved last year. And this rulemaking piece just got caught up in COVID last year, and is something the department needs the authority to do that so that they can help set the rules for that career readiness credentials. The next part brings us up to date. We have a new 2018 Perkins Law, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education of the 21st Century Act of 2018. And we had to go through a long process for Perkins process to review our whole programs throughout the state and publish an extensive document about that and how we're doing and what we plan to do and what we need to do. So this puts in statute that now is the governing document there. Next part of the bill makes a couple of technical, word changes from president to chancellor of who appoints the people to serve on the pre-engineering and technical curriculum and pre-engineering and technical advisory council. And then bottom of page 5 is a little more substantial issue. This relates to the dual concurrent enrollment program in the Department of Education. This is something that we have worked on for quite some time. It's been extraordinarily successful because what it does is it lets the high school students take community college and college courses at a much reduced tuition rate. And then they will have those credits, which could then reduce the cost of their college education and really enhance what their education is. And Senator Khan has been a champion of this. The current program focuses on STEM courses, but it really has become clear that we ought to open that up to other courses as well, because it would allow students who are going to need courses that aren't STEM courses to complete their community college programs to be able to take those courses as well. And if the purpose here is to enable students in high school to get a big leg up and save a lot of money for their families, then we ought to include those as well. I will mention one issue about this. Of course, we set the policy, and I think this is a good policy for us to do. But in terms of the funding implications for how much money is in the dual and concurrent enrollment program, there's a question about that funding, whether it's going to be included in the budget or not. And so, again, like so many things, we set what we think is good policy, and of course, finance is going to determine just how that funding for that program, how that goes on. And then the next parts here have to do with the move that we approved a few years ago to open up CTE programs to sophomores. This was a great idea. The engineering program takes 3 years anyway, so we had to recognize that reality. But it also means students can start their career in technical education in their sophomore year and maybe be pretty much done with it, the retired courses, by the end of junior year. And that opens up the senior year for apprenticeships, for dual and concurrent enrollment, and just for really extraordinary opportunities would be available for that. So what this does then is it asks the school districts to develop policies then about their, that letting the 10th graders as well participate in a dual and concurrent enrollment program, to develop policies about that. There's a little more on the dual and concurrent enrollment program, and I think we're going to hear from Beth Dorn, who runs that program for the community colleges, a little bit later on. And then finally, again, addressing something for the Career Ready certificate, that this is helping students be advised about that program. And so that again is a kind of a language cleanup on that Career Ready credential. And then lastly, Madam Chair, we established a few years ago a tax credit program that enabled businesses to get a tax credit for donations of equipment to career and technical education centers. Great advantage here is the equipment can be in the center, and then the students get trained on it, and they can go into jobs in that field. But also very creatively, it allowed businesses to take a portion of the employee's time who supervises internships and apprenticeships to have a tax credit for that too. This was introduced as kind of a pilot program, a couple of years, see how successful it is. And it's been very successful. The Career and Technical Education Center directors have been motivated, as I had hoped, to develop more relationships with our businesses about the kind of workforce training that they need. So this part of the bill just extends the program out another 4 years to 2026. So thank you, Madam Chair. We have to take any questions on this, and then I hope I could introduce another part as well.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Does anyone have any questions for Senator Waters on this portion of the bill? Okay, Senator Waters, you may introduce your other portion. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for indulging me with this. You know, I just haven't quite learned yet how to be in two places at once, but I'm working on it with Zoom. So this bill brings together a variety of efforts expressing the value for New Hampshire students to increase their knowledge of the environment and the career pathways available, and the general wellness that are involved in greater environmental, outdoor education, and outdoor recreation education. There was an outdoor education task force that reported in 2006 and updated its report in 2016, which laid out many creative ways that teachers in New Hampshire are already taking advantage of outdoor education, environmental education. And so what the bill will do, it will enhance those efforts through our curriculum. Also, the bill recognizes the great needs of the outdoor recreation industry, not just in the North Country where we think of, but throughout the states. Tourism, outdoor recreation are just really growing parts of our economy. And so the bill will provide some particular ways in which we can increase outdoor recreation education for careers in those areas. And then lastly, it creates a youth advisory council on all the areas in this bill that would let students get together, learn about policy, and advise the legislature about what they think is going to be useful for their lives, both in school and then going forward in careers. The language here on findings is related to some of the language that has been in the task force report, but also recognizes the particular importance that our outdoors have played in New Hampshire. And it's, you know, the ways in which we want to be good stewards of this and understand our landscape and our lands for environmental stewardship, of course, but also for outdoor education and outdoor recreation. It notes here the extraordinary participation in the economy, 79,000 jobs, billions of dollars in spending and in wages and in state and local taxes. This effort in outdoor education is strongly supported by Commissioner Taylor Caswell. We were the 16th state in 2019 to approve in Business and Economic Affairs and Office of Outdoor Recreation. And great news about this, Taylor Caswell has put this in his budget to fund a director of this program, and it just started to advertise this position last week. We also had last year, there was the founding of the Granite Outdoors Alliance with a variety of companies and outdoor recreation businesses in New Hampshire, Senator Bradley and Commissioner Caswell. And it just shows that these goals here are something that we really can achieve through this legislation. So, with the definition of environmental literacy and then how we might achieve it through environmental education and outdoor recreational education. I do want to emphasize this bill is very carefully crafted not to create new mandates and not to require new spending. So there's no unfunded mandates here because it recognizes that there are many educational programs and efforts that are already underway and could be embedded in existing courses by our teachers, and our school boards, of course, would be the ones who have the authority to determine how this is done. For example, we have a lot of fish and game department courses. Hunter education could be used. The fishing programs, some of you may not know, we have fishing as a sport in some of our schools now, competitive sport for bass fishing. And what it does, it asks the State Board of Education then to develop a model curriculum. And I want to emphasize that there will be an amendment here for line 13 on page 9. This was just an oversight on my part. They were asking the Board of Education to develop a model curriculum. Obviously the actual curriculum and the development of it is at the school board level. We've done this in other areas where the Department of Education provides a model and then the school boards can take it and work with their own schools about how to do that. The 2016 report from that Outdoor Education Task Force, it's about 100 pages and it lays out in just exquisite detail what such a curriculum and what such standards and how this could be done and lesson plans and so on. And so that is ready to go, and the Department of Education can work with that report and really essentially kind of, I think, just adopt it as that model curriculum, and then it'll be good to go. So the way that this is embedded in adequate education, as you'll see in the bottom of page 9, in existing categories for earth sciences, for example, including climate and environmental sciences, for science, sound wellness and environmental practices, including outdoor recreation to enable and enhance their own well-being as well as that of others, skills for lifelong learning, again, lifelong learning, career in education, or concern about New Hampshire's lands. And then it also asks the career and technical education system and the community college system of New Hampshire to get together and see what kind of programs and credentialing that may develop. And you're going to hear some more about this from Eric Farworth and also from the community college system and from the USNH. There are already some great programs under the ways, and there's a great model program underway and at the community colleges up north. UNH has established a new program in outdoor education. And then there's a new major at Plymouth State University that started last year on outdoor education. So there really is this pathway that can be developed from our high schools into that. On page 10, what we have here is just some clarifications of language that outdoor education facilities can be included in existing school grants. And some conversation with Diana Fenton and with Amy Clark yesterday. It seems that on page 10, part 2, that this may, that by understanding, they say, well, we've been kind of doing this already. So maybe this is redundant, but also it might help just at least have it in statute if that's what they're doing already. And then in the part 7 here, the Department of Education said, this is going to cost us, and it's not really something we need to do. So I am going to ask, and I'll provide amendment language for you to just delete section 7. That gets rid of a physical issue, and it did seem not to be necessary. Part 8 deals with the Public School Infrastructure Fund. And here I was trying to find ways to let schools, especially in light of COVID, who felt that they needed to improve ventilation systems, and that outdoor education also might be a way to improve health and wellness. And the study was released last week showing how outdoor education efforts around the country have really increased student wellness. And there's a hope that even after COVID, they would continue. But Diana Fenton and Amy Clark said, well, really, you shouldn't put this in B, that we should have a separate section G here that would simply say, and again, I'll provide the language, a school building infrastructure proposal related to pandemic disease, including projects that address environmental education facilities and ventilation needs. So that's a way, again, without creating any new funding needs or new mandates, would enable in this section schools to come forward and request funds in that area. And then lastly, I mean, not quite lastly, on page 11, it asks that there be a collaboration with natural and cultural resources, business and economic affairs, and educators on how to enhance these recreation industry activities, and that there is a national recreation industry confluence of accords that many states have signed onto, and that it might be great advantage to us economically to collaborate with that. So this part of the bill says, hey, take a look at that, and maybe we want to sign on to those five criteria in that, and that membership requirements in those criteria now have been fulfilled by Commissioner Caswell funding that office. And now finally, lastly, a New Hampshire Youth Environmental Education and Conservation Council. This council would be composed of students who would be able to offer, learn about and offer advice on these programs. I'm sure you all know there is an extraordinary hunger in our youth these days for more environmental education and understanding, and particularly in New Hampshire, more preparation and how to be involved in the outdoor recreation industry. It includes no legislators. And I will just note that last year when this idea was first proposed, and this year as well, the existing New Hampshire Legislative Youth Council has endorsed this strongly, and thinks it would be something that would greatly enhance what they're trying to do, but is an important focus on this area. So Madam Chair, again, I'm sorry to have gone on quite so long, but I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about both at once, and I'd be happy to answer a question or two, and then I think I do need to get over to the other hearing.
So I'm going to hand it back over to the other Madam Chair.
Senator Ward, you are muted.
I share Senator Waters' frustrations running back and forth. Things are not happening at the time when they was advertised that would happen. So now we have section 3, which I believe is going to be Senator Khan.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Just before Senator Waters leaves, we don't have a fiscal note, and it seems, Senator, relative to section 4, you've taken real caution to try to avoid that there is a fiscal obligation, that school districts have some flexibility as to how they address the range of environmental education opportunities for their students. Am I getting that right?
Thank you, Senator Khan. Yes, exactly. And, we will get a fiscal note. I think that in the discussion yesterday, by clarifying that little piece that I had about whether the DOE would have to investigate on the construction things, that there really will not be fiscal impact noted here on that. I mean, it was designed to say you've got existing programs, and if you want to have outdoor education facilities, that's something you can plan and find ways to fund that in your regular budgets, or potentially when you're renovating your school, and if there's any school building aid or the special aid, that's something to consider. But this is very carefully crafted to avoid any mandates or anything that could not be done by the desire of the school to implement a curriculum.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, one more question, if I could.
Sure.
Thank you. Back on the previous part, and I think that was part two. There's the dual and concurrent enrollment, and I just while we don't have a fiscal note here, have you seen the impact of the number of students that are taking dual and concurrent enrollment currently, and any kind of projection of what the expansion to STEM-related courses might lead to, either more course credits being earned by high school students, or I'm just trying to get a gauge. Where are we at today? Where do you think we might head in the future relative to these opportunities if the definition was broadened?
Well, thank you, Senator. And this is something that is being wrestled with by the community college system when they were looking at developing a fiscal note for this. And I'm not sure whether they're ready to address that. You know that program had some $900,000 in it. It has been very successful. Representative Ladd pushed this like crazy as well to get this, because of the need for STEM education. I think, clearly it could potentially add to the cost of that program. But I think that it is a policy issue here. Students need those other courses as well. And that if they're going to be able to succeed in the STEM courses, sometimes they do need to get some of the other classes as well for those. This is why I say I hope you consider the policy that if dual concurrent enrollment is good for STEM, it's probably good for these other areas as well, given the purpose of the whole program. But really, we understand that finance, as it gets this and decides whether or not to fund the program at all, could certainly develop some criteria as to how these funds might be apportioned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Waters.
Okay, I will bring in Senator Gannon now for part 3.
Second 3, yeah. Welcome, Mr. Senator Gannon.
No, as long as you call me, it doesn't matter. Good to see you, Senator Ward. Senator Riccardi, were you boiling anything in the pot behind you? You're cooking dinner?
Yeah, I started it when we had, a half an hour break?
Okay, there'll be no water left by the time you're done. It'll burnt off.
It's soup.
Okay, I'll be over later, so keep it hot. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Senator Bill Gannon, represented District 23. With 4 student athletes in my family, I am happy today to introduce Section 3 of SB 148, relative to emergency plans for sports-related injuries. I like the bill. It makes me feel like a Papa Bear guarding my cubs. I'm out on the field and I watch the cart come in and out, and I'm always gasping if it's one of my girls. Currently, though, a gap exists with emergency plans to respond to seriously or potential life-threatening sports-related injuries during school-sponsored activities, specifically for athletics in the public and non-public school settings that offer athletics for grades 4 through 12. Section 3 updates our current law that was written in 1971, back when Lou was playing football, relating to policies adopted by local school boards for the purposes of providing immediate and adequate emergency care for students and school personnel who sustain injury or illness during school hours or during scheduled school activities. By updating the statute, this bill not only aligns with best practices, it standardizes emergency plans for sports-related injuries and illnesses. It allows each entity to be informed of the minimum standards of care athletes will receive. In addition, this bill provides the flexibility for each school, even in Keene or any other geographic location, large populations, and it accommodates each district's individual needs. Should also be noted that the proposed bill identifies that public and non-public schools shall establish procedures as part of their plan for athletes with a confirmed COVID-19 diagnosis to return to play, which is consistent with best practice and expert recommendations. In conclusion, emergency plans are a zero-cost policy that incorporates the resources the school already has available and can easily be modified as the school accesses additional resources. I urge the committee to support Section 3. There are several athletic trainers who had more of a hand in the bill than I did, and other stakeholders who were involved in drafting the legislation that can speak more directly to the need and importance of a statewide baseline for emergency action sports plans. I can speak as the parent on the sidelines and tell you that this is a good idea.
Thank you, Senator Gannon. Senator Hennessy has a question for you.
I will
Thank
give
you,
it a
Madam
shot.
Chair. Senator Gannon, this has to do with the effective date. I have a little concern. So the effective date is shall take effect upon passage, but this requires the school boards to have a plan in place effective the first full school year after the effective date. So if this passes sometime in the end or were to take a signed by the governor in the end of June, sometime in July, school boards would have to develop this plan, some of them within a month's time frame. Are you open to a later effective date, or do you
sure
think
am.
that this is okay?
Senator Hennessy, that should have occurred to me when I read the bill, and it did not. So yes, that would be certainly a good idea.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator Khan.
Thank you. Greetings, Senator Gannon. I know the motto, never be late for dinner. So careful, Senator Ricciardi. Has the New Hampshire Brain Injury Association been engaged in this? I know I'd say that last year we had amendments to this section in 240 that they were very active in. So I know they have an interest and just wanted to inquire.
I've spoken with trainers, I've spoken with coaches, and I think some of the people who are going to testify after me can specifically address to what stakeholders were involved. And I'm hoping they're going to answer yes, but we'll let them answer that.
Thanks, Senator.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much, Senator Gannon.
Thank you, Senator Ward.
Now we come to Section 4, which I think it's mine. That is going to be a very easy one, I hope. We have the Chapter 188, the title, the education, the private post-secondary career schools. And there are a lot of schools that have to be licensed and have regulations. And then there are schools that are not under those same requirements. The Section 188-G:1 and down at Section 2 and the schools. These are some that are exempt from those requirements. Schools offering non-credit courses exclusively for avocational purposes. It's not really clear what schools are exempted from licensure and other obligations. So we have an amendment to that to add to the Part 4 of the bill, this bill that we have 148. Under D, adding to that, schools offering non-credit courses exclusively for avocational. And then the addition is fitness and recreational wellness or personal interest purposes or instructional programs or courses that prepare individuals to teach such pursuits. So the addition to this Section 4, that is it. It's 1.5, maybe 2 sentences worth of it. Any questions from the committee? Senator Prentice?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the amendment would broaden and be inclusive of the original language, which was yoga teachers, by covering it with all fitness.
Yeah, it's including that because some people thought it was just the yoga people, but it is not. It's more than that.
Follow up?
Yep.
So this is the list of who has to be licensed by post-secondary as opposed or as defined as a post-secondary career school. I'm just reading over here versus the list of who's exempted. So this is who would fall under this category.
In this chapter, the one that I just read, private post-secondary career schools shall not include.
Shall not include, okay.
And then it says school authorized to grant degree, school specifically licensed as an educational training school by state agency, schools operated by a business organization exclusively for the training of the business-owned employees, and then the schools offering non-credit courses exclusively for avocational purposes, and then this other thing that's 2 sentences are added to it.
Okay.
And there will be somebody that can speak to it from the DOE.
Thank you, Senator Ward.
Any other questions from the committee? Then I think we are done with the introductions to the 5 sections. Now we can start taking questions from the public.
Shall we start with part 1?
Sure.
Okay, if you'd like to speak to part 1, please raise your hand now. Lisa Henson Hatz.
Lisa Hatz from the DOE.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Ward. I appreciate coming before the committee this afternoon. Just a brief explanation for the changes that you see in section 1. Vocational rehabilitation is updating our administrative rules this year and have found through that review that we had some statute changes that needed to be made. In previous rule updates, we had failed to repeal a couple of the programs that were no longer being serviced by or administered by the vocational rehabilitation program, namely the telecommunications equipment program, as well as the personal worker care program. We did research on those. The telecommunications program is currently housed with the Governor's Commission on Disability and has its own administrative rules. And the other program has no funding attached to it that we could find. And we reached out to Health and Human Services as well, and they're not administering that program. So we needed to update our statute to be in alignment with current day operations. So that is the main rationale for these changes. And we thank you for assisting in this effort.
Thank you for explaining it to us. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Ms. Hatch.
Thank you.
Any others who want to speak to number 1, part 1?
I don't see any more hands for part 1.
Okay. Part 2.
Please raise your hand if you want to speak to part 2. And if you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. Eric Frauworth.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Ward and committee members. Senator Waters did an extremely thorough job of explaining this. And so I don't think I needed to go into anything else, but I wanted to be here just in case there were questions about what we were doing.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee members? I guess Senator Waters did an excellent job. Well, here's Senator Khan.
Yeah, no, and indeed he did. I'll second that. I think, you know, there's a lot of cleanup in part 2, and I appreciate your role in doing that, Mr. Frauworth. Senator Waters sort of indicated that it would be the department to quantify for us the impacts of dual and concurrent enrollment. Do you maintain some of that information, or is that exclusively with the community college system?
I would actually defer to the community college system. We would encourage students to enroll in the classes, but Beth and the community college system would probably have a much better handle on what the numbers might look like.
Yeah, and then you're going to be, I'll ask you the part 4 question that does relate to part 2. So I guess to the extent that environmental education could be a part of career technical education with the act that or the changes recommended. Are we reimbursing that as STEM related courses now? Are there some at high schools that fit into that category?
Potentially, if a student is taking I guess an environmental science class or something in that realm, it would classify as a STEM or a STEM related course. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that could be fire safety. It could be
yes,
a variety of things that relate to our environmental management, right?
Yes, absolutely. The inclusion of the CTE courses was really more for evening the playing field. We offer business and marketing programs, and a student who, say, was in a biotech program was able to get 2 classes at the community college under the scholarship, but their classmate who is in a business management program and could also be participating in a Running Start class wasn't able to get that scholarship. And so sort of broadening that field to make it more equitable for the students was certainly a consideration. And we're again trying to keep as many of our CTE students in New Hampshire. And by granting them these scholarships, it will get them further into their associate's degree at the community college, and hopefully they'll stay to finish.
Thank you for that explanation.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. I think I'll be back for the environmental outdoor program when you get there.
Okay, great. Do we move to section 4? Or do we have any other questions on 3?
I think.
2, I mean.
Yeah, I think we're on 2, and Beth Doran has raised her hand.
Oh, okay. Ms. Doran, you are on.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beth Doran, and I am the Director of College Access and Department of Education Programs and Initiatives of the Community College System of New Hampshire. And I'm here to testify in support of Part 2, Section 12 of the proposed legislation, which makes changes to the existing dual and concurrent enrollment program as established in our SA 188E. These changes add all courses taken at a career and technical education centers for dual or concurrent enrollment by students in grades 10, 11, and 12 to the program, adding to the STEM courses that Eric has mentioned and Senator Khan that are already covered in the program. CCS&H has very close connections to CTE centers and programs, and we work very closely together to provide early access to obtaining college credit for CTE students at our colleges. These students are pursuing career pathways that very often lead to good jobs, and we want to encourage them along their way. We've seen tremendous support and expansion of our CCS&H dual and concurrent enrollment program this past year, especially due to past funding that has enabled students to take up to 2 STEM courses at no charge. Adding funding for all these CTE courses will allow for an increased number of CTE students to take advantage of these opportunities of securing college credits to get a head start on their college careers at a reduced cost. As a policy matter, this bill would provide opportunities for students who may not have the opportunity to take courses for college credit, and we fully encourage and support these equitable opportunities for all CTE students. I'd just like to note, as was mentioned earlier, that the funding by Senator Waters, that the funding for this STEM scholarship program has been eliminated from the governor's budget. At some point, as Senator Waters mentioned, I'm sure this will be looked at in the finance process. But overall, as a matter of policy, CCS&H supports this provision in SB 148. I'd also like to mention, because I believe there was a question as to the amount of funding that's been available to students. In FY 19, we were able to offer about $1.2 million in scholarships for students in STEM courses that are offering the dual and concurrent enrollment courses at the high schools. This past fall, just in the fall 20, even through the pandemic, students still signing up for these dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment courses, we were able to offer $644,000 in scholarships, and this is out of the $950,000 that is available. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have in addition to dual and concurrent enrollment, but I do need to head out shortly, but do want to say that we also do support the outdoor education programs that are mentioned, I believe, in part 4.
Senator Hennessy, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Beth, for taking my question. So you mentioned the scholarship amount. Do you have any idea what the actual cost to the state is for these scholarships?
You mean what's in the actual budget?
No, I mean, so a student will receive a scholarship to take a certain class, but that doesn't actually mean what that class costs the CCA, the community college system to run. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, the cost of the dual and Running Start courses, dual and concurrent, well, the concurrent enrollment courses through Running Start is $150 per course. The cost of our early college courses, which happen on our college campus, are half the cost of our traditional courses, which is probably about $300 or so for each of those courses. And it costs us more than that to run these courses, to run this program. So we're, probably not even breaking even in offering these programs.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you
for your
for having me.
testimony.
I don't see any other hands raised for part 2 of Senate Bill 148.
Okay. How about moving to part 3? Plans for sports-related injuries.
Please raise your hand now if you want to speak to part 3 of the bill. And if you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. Theodore Smith.
Mr. Smith. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Theodore Smith. I'm a resident of Georges Mills, New Hampshire. I'm testifying in support of SB 148, Part 3. This is the amendment to RSA 200, Section 40, Emergency Plans for Sport. I'm a New Hampshire licensed athletic trainer employed by Colby-Sawyer College as the director for their athletic training program. The testimony that I'm providing represents my views and not those of my employer. As an athletic trainer, strength and conditioning coach, and sport coach, I've had the experience at the youth, high school, college, and professional level of athletics. With these experiences, I've served as the primary or support for a variety of acute orthopedic, neurological, or cardiovascular emergencies, which necessitated the activation of an emergency plan, and feel I can attest strongly to the value of an emergency plan can have to reduce errors and controllable factors post the onset of injury and enhancing the quality of care provided. The requirement of emergency action plan for local school boards and non-public schools has support not just for student athletes competing in our playing fields, but also the administrating coaches who work to support our student athletes. The benefit lies in that a uniform floor of prior planning is a part of any youth practice or event occurring in the state for grades 4 through 12. This prior planning can then be shared with all support personnel, which in emergency will also include local emergency medical service providers for schools in which they may be professional or volunteer. For example, SAU 65 is the Kearsarge Regional School District, which serves 7 towns. With practicing competition fields existing in Bradford, Newberry, New London, and Sutton, immediate response to emergencies is often by volunteer, non-transport, first aid stabilization teams or FAST teams, which will then transition care to a transport provider, of which New London EMS is one. By having an emergency action plan in place that is disseminated to and coordinated with EMS as outlined on page 7, line 16 to 17 of the bill, continuity with this broad spectrum of individuals will improve response time as well as the quality of care provided. With emergency plans for all schools, athletic directors, coaches, athletes, and parents can expect consistency in the minimum quality of care New Hampshire youth participating in athletics can receive during an emergency, whether they're on their home turf or traveling to a neighboring town. In emergency, the quality of response and outcome related to a catastrophic injury should not be dependent upon the town or SAU in which it occurred. An athlete or parent should not have to hear that if this injury or condition was experienced at a different location, that long-term complications or even death could have been avoided if post-incident controllable factors had been addressed appropriately. With the current language of RSA 200, Section 40, emergency care currently 50 years old, and lacking objective guidelines to create consistency from one SAU to another, I strongly support the language and intent of this bill to address this gap, and I'm hopeful that it will become law so that we can avoid reintroducing the bill in future legislative cycles that's colloquially known as Susie's or Johnny's bill, with similar language due to the avoidable death or significant injury after a future New Hampshire student athlete received a negative outcome that could have been prevented had measures that are part of the emergency action plan been implemented as outlined in this bill. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions from the committee members? You did a good job. There are no questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Somebody else?
Yep, next we have Becca Stearns.
Becca Stearns, welcome.
Hello, honorable members of the committee. Thank you for having me today. My name is Rebecca Stearns. I am the Chief Operating Officer of the Corey Stringer Institute, and I'm here today representing the Institute's full support of Part 3 SB 148 Emergency Action Plans for Sport. The mission of the Corey Stringer Institute is to provide research, education, advocacy, and consultation to maximize performance, optimize safety, and prevent sudden death for the athlete, warfighter, and laborer. Our goal is to reduce catastrophic injuries related to the top causes of death, and there are about 4 conditions that make up over 90% of these sudden deaths that we see in athletes. These 4 conditions include cardiac arrest, exertional heat stroke, traumatic head injuries, and exertional sickling. The 5 years that are between 2015 and 2019, we lost 335 high school athletes in the United States alone. However, through state policy requirements, we're confident that more athletes can go home to their families and parents at the end of the night. We believe that this bill enacts 5 vital health and safety components benefiting the high school athletes in the state of New Hampshire. These include, first and foremost, mandating emergency action plans. Alone, an EAP can improve the survival rate of a cardiac victim by 35%. And part of having an emergency action plan, this also includes outlining AED access. We know that each year, 1 in 36 high schools will have a student suffer a cardiac arrest, and currently survival rates are 54% for high school athletes. However, we know that in cases where an AED is used and activated, 89% of victims can survive. It also includes policies related to weather and heat acclimatization. These 2 policies have resulted in a 35% and 55% reduction in heat illness, respectively, at the high school level. Lastly, cold water immersion and outlining a cold water immersion policy we know can save 100% of heat stroke victim lives when it's applied within the first 15 minutes. All of these are established best practices that are supported by leading sport health and safety organizations like the National Athletic Training Association and the American College of Sports Medicine. We know that there are over 120 schools in New Hampshire, but we also know that about 42% of those and almost 9,000 students have no access to an athletic trainer, who's the typical provider who creates and implements these policies. So it makes it that much more vital to have laws to ensure the basic health and safety policies implemented for all athletes. We know that even for those that do have athletic trainers, there are gaps in these policies that exist. Our most recent survey showed that almost 4,000 New Hampshire athletes are at a school with an athletic trainer that has no established emergency action plan, which again is why this bill could allow for equal health and safety protection across all athletes in the state. It is our hope that through the continued adoption of best practices, we'll continue to see reductions in the senseless sport-related deaths. Each of the topic areas I addressed today are currently legislated in at least 1 or more other states. For example, we know that 7 states have legislation that every school in their state have an emergency action plan. And we know that 15 other states already have language to support AED use in athletic venues, 9 of which were done just in the last 5 years alone. So adopting this bill would provide the necessary and basic policies to ensure that no other young athletes' lives are needlessly lost. So I just want to thank you for your attention today and would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stearns. Very good points there. Any questions from the, yes, Senator Hennessy.
Thank you. And thank you, Becca, for your great testimony. I have one question is, Are there, I guess not best practices, but are there examples that of these requirements that a high school or a school board could use to implement rather than reinventing the wheel on their own?
Yes, I'm so happy you asked that. We have many templates available, open access available on our website for things like emergency action plan, weather policies, and everything that goes into the components of an emergency action plan. So there are resources available, and I'd be happy to share those with you if you'd like as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps you could share that, send it to our legislative aide, and she could distribute it to the rest of the committee members.
Yep, I'd be happy to.
Thank you very much. Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Stearns, for your testimony. I got to say, the testimony and presentation by Senator Gannon and others, you got me convinced we ought to do something. What I'm wondering, there is no provision here, and this may not be your question, but I don't see a hand up from somebody from the Department of Education. Does this need rulemaking by the department in order to be effectively implemented, so that some of the standards that the previous question and that you've referenced are a part of the rules and can be vetted with the schools that need to be implementing this before they establish the policy? I guess there's, I just hate to see something as important as this, not have the proper placement in rules that so many of the other education requirements of our schools have.
So I want to make sure I understand your question appropriately. When you say rulemaking, are you asking if there needs to be specific qualifications or management of the policies?
Just the guidance to the schools for the forms that they might complete, or frequency of updating, the guidance from particular associations that ought to be consulted.
Sure. Yep. So the good news is that, as related to my previous answer too, there are a lot of resources available that are freely and open access. And a lot of those provide those outlines of recommendations and guidance in order to how to create these. And a lot of the documents that we host and have available are essentially plug and play documents that can be customized to the school itself. And most of the schools in New Hampshire do have access to an athletic trainer who's qualified to be also creating these and guiding the implementation of them as well. So there are many different options and avenues, I would say, to make sure that the implementation component is up to par and enacts the standards that we're hoping for.
Well, thanks for trying to answer that question.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Senator Prentice, did you?
Oh, Rebecca, your testimony was great. Thank you so much. I actually, before I became an EMT and a paramedic, I was a student athletic trainer in high school and in college. But I do think that Senator Khan raises a good question, and I don't think it's so much for you, but we should probably just check with DOE, because having, as Senator Hennessy asked, having the plans available makes it's not such a big lift. I mean, this makes sense. We need to do it. It's not such a big lift for the schools, but do they have to have any rulemaking? And I think we should just get clarification on that. And then, I mean, I fully support this and was a co-sponsor. So you had me at hello.
Thank you.
Is Mr. Appleby around from DOE? He might be able to answer the question.
Yes.
Would you be willing?
Next? I'm sorry, Senator Ward, I didn't hear you. Do you want me to bring him in?
Would he be willing to address that?
He was there and then I lost him.
I see him.
You do? Okay.
Yes, that's now, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Appleby, thank you for being here. You just heard a question. Are you able to answer that?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Senators. Thank you. I would speculate that this is not, I would say, first of all, this is not my area. I'm actually on for part 4, but in this instance, I would guess that we would want rulemaking ability just to be safe. But I'm probably not the best person to answer that question.
Okay. Do you know who in the DOE we should contact?
Is Diana Fenton still on?
Yes.
Diana may be able to answer that question more effectively.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we
Mrs.
have,
Fenton?
okay, yep.
Ms. Fenton, welcome again.
Thank you. So I'll be the first to say that I went to a meeting with Frank and I got a text from Steve Appleby saying, you might want to weigh in on this. And I have no idea what this is.
Well, we're talking about section 3, which has to do with emergency plans for sports-related injuries. And the responsibility, and we just had somebody talking about plans that are available, and should this be also part of rulemaking for the DOE?
So let me just pull up the bill real quick. Just give me a minute here. We can blame this all on Frank because he wanted to meet with me. All right. So before you get me in too much trouble with Frank, should it be part of rulemaking? Generally speaking, I think, so Steve Appleby just texted me and said, I said yes. So in an act of solidarity, I think rulemaking is probably the right place to put it. Rulemaking is a great power that the department has to really flush these issues out that the law allows for, as you well know. So if you want to put in a rulemaking authority, we can certainly address it appropriately.
Okay. Does that take care of the concerns of committee members? I see heads saying yes.
Better to take care of it.
Thank you very much for clarifying that.
My
Do we,
pleasure. Thank you.
do we have anybody else who wants to speak to 3?
Yeah, we have 3 more speakers for part 3. I'm going to bring in Cassandra Snow.
Cassandra Snow, welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for allowing me the opportunity to speak on Senate Bill 148, Part 3, Emergency Plans for Sports-Related Injuries. So my name is Cassandra Snow, and I'm a licensed athletic trainer in New Hampshire. I'm also the Safe Sports Network Program Director, and we provide athletic training services to 9 public and non-public high schools in Southern New Hampshire. And we have about 6,000 kids, give or take, under our care or under our umbrella. I'm also a past president of the New Hampshire Athletic Trainers Association, but first I'm a parent to a 12-year-old and a 12-week-old. So I had this great testimony lined up, and I think everybody else before me did a fantastic job at making all the key points. So I'm going to personally testify in support of this bill. And I second all points made in previous testimony. And I can answer, I think it was Senator Kahn's question about the Brain Injury Association. We did reach out to the Brain Injury Association, 2 neuropsychologists that were associated with the Brain Injury Association, so Dr. Marylander and Dr. Lichtenstein. I believe both submitted written testimony because they could not be here today. And then Dr. Marylander connected us with, I think it's Steve Wade, who I believe is the executive director, but Theodore Smith could speak more to that because he was involved in those email communications. So we are, trying to be more collaborative in how we approach this. We also had a meeting with the New Hampshire Interscholastic Athletic Association, where we were talking about a lot of this stuff too. But overall, I am in support of this bill personally. I won't take any more time reiterating other people's key points, but I did submit written testimony that provides further details to supplement a lot of the remarks made, including stats similar to what Becca Stearns submitted, as well as how it is a zero cost policy, because it does take what the school already has for resources and is easily adaptable. So it's not necessarily it's not mandating anybody to buy anything additional, but there are alternatives to various environmental monitoring procedures. And as Safe Sports Network Program Director, we are a community
nonprofit that can provide some guidance to people who do want to reach out for clarity. Always looking for collaboration. So thank you for the time and accepting my brief testimony, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Snow. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Christine Reyes.
Christine Reyes.
Good afternoon, committee. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for your time to be allowed to speak to you for the record today. For the record, my name is Christine Dara Reyes. I'm a local Manchester resident, mother, a collegiate educator, a nationally board certified and New Hampshire state licensed athletic trainer. Today, I also represent the New Hampshire Athletic Trainers Association as their elected president, speaking to you as well in favor of Section 3 of SB 148. The largest, most direct reason I'm supportive of this bill is because it fulfills a substantial gap and brings New Hampshire closer to the best medical practices as outlined by the professional organizations of which I have been educated and licensed to provide care through. This legislation was drafted intentionally to allow each district to develop their own plan based on their specific needs, those wants, the experiences, and even the types of activities that are provided therein. The bill was crafted with ease of implementation in mind. Beyond my elected position as a mother and resident of the state, I urge this committee to support this bill or this section of the bill, specifically to address high-risk scenarios within the medical community, because we have worked tirelessly to identify and create prevention protocols. I appreciate all of my colleagues and peers who have spoken already. I second or third them verbally, and you may as well read about additional written testimony as to why these are important for a variety of reasons, for heat-related illness, hydration, concussions, COVID-19, and the one I just want to give a little highlight to that doesn't often is sickle cell anemia or sickle cell trait, which is a blood condition. It was diagnosed as a condition more than 100 years ago, but it did not begin to get regular, unbiased, widespread testing until 2002. In locations without an emergency action plan in place for a student identified with this condition, this information could potentially waste away on a medical form. But luckily, with that change in testing, our children born after 2002 are getting this testing when they're born here, even in the state of New Hampshire, just like my son was. So just to conclude, this is just one of the many, many important reasons I support this zero cost policy. I urge this committee to support this section and will gladly answer any questions the committee has to the best of my ability as the president of the New Hampshire Athletic Trainers Association. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reyes. Any questions from the committee members? I don't see one, so thank you very much for your testimony.
Next, we have Leonard Angeli.
Leonard?
Yeah, good afternoon, Senator Ward and committee. I first want to start by saying, as an athletic trainer of over 30 years, I've had a lot of experience with emergency action plans. I've also had a lot of experience as an EMT. And I don't want to reiterate what all my colleagues have already brought through. I think I just wanted to bring forth a situation that I had handled in one of my current positions where the emergency action plan worked well. I work at a small private boarding school. We have very large facility as far as spread out, all that kind of stuff. And we did have a young man who was mountain biking who actually went over the handlebars and broke his neck. The coaches who had been trained by myself did a fantastic job, but it was a situation where we were on a mountain biking trail, and because of the emergency action plan and because of the way we had reviewed it on a regular basis with our coaches, everything worked like clockwork. To say that the young man, again, 12 weeks later was back on the ski slopes and all that stuff is a miracle. But it did work. And it worked because not only did we set the plan, but we reviewed the plan. And I think that's a very key thing that has to be reiterated in this whole thing, is that it's not just, getting the plan out there, it's making sure that everybody understands the plan. And that's my key thing. And as the president-elect of the New Hampshire Athletic Trainers Association, I feel that it's a, my honor to be able to review this with my colleagues. And more than happy to answer any questions. But I guess my key point would be that, yes, I support this 110%, but I also support that I think we need to educate our coaches, and as we all know, some of our smaller schools do not have, big time coaches and people that have been trained so well. Their parents and their other teachers who are helping out in different situations. So I just think it's very important that we educate them. And not only do we make an emergency action plan, but we follow it and we train people. And I think that's how our successes will be.
Thank you very much. I think your point of not just having the plan, but actually practicing it so that you're up to date on it, it's a key. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Leonard.
We have one more hand raised for part 3. It's NHATA secretary.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Allison O'Connor Sutherland. I am obviously the secretary of the NHATA. I just wanted to just basically thank you all for your time and support what's been said in front of me. I am also a nationally certified athletic trainer, licensed in the state of New Hampshire. I do work at Dartmouth College. I'm also an advanced EMT. I've been nationally registered for over, probably 15 years now. And I just wanted to really second what everybody's said through my graduate work at the University of Connecticut, working with the folks at the Corey Stringer Institute. My background as an EMS provider and my tenure as an athletic trainer of over a decade. I think that this is incredibly important legislation. And I sincerely hope that it will come to fruition, because I think that this will be tremendously helpful to keep everybody in New Hampshire safe.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
A few more hands have gone up. Amy Clark.
Amy Clark,
Good
welcome.
afternoon, committee members. For the record, my name is Amy Clark, and I'm with the Department of Education under School Safety and Facility Management. I'm actually registered to talk about Section 5. However, while I'm listening, I just wanted to chime in about Section 3 that just kind of caught my attention. Keep in mind that RSA 18964 requires that all schools have emergency response plans. They report those emergency response plans to the Department of Education and Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And in those plans, there is an annex for medical response. I guess what I would say is perhaps that annex doesn't explicitly talk about the intent of this legislation. So the intent of the legislation is perfectly suitable and sounds like it should be put in. But what I guess I would caution you is requiring schools to do both the medical response annex in the emergency operation plan that all schools have, and a separate emergency plan. Perhaps the language should say something like, if not included, or maybe it should require that this piece of legislation be included in the existing emergency operation plan. I just wanted to call that out. And if you have any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Clark.
Senator Ward, Leonard Angeli has raised his hand, I think, to speak for a second time.
Okay. Okay, Leonard, be brief. You're muted.
I'm sorry?
I said you were muted, and if you can be brief, because we are running sort of late here.
Oh, I've already spoken.
Oh, Somehow we thought you wanted to speak a second time.
Oh, no, thank you.
Oh, okay, fine. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands for part 3. Shall we move on to part 4?
Sure.
Please raise your hand if you want to speak to part 4. Steve Appleby.
Mr. Appleby.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Steve Appleby. I'm the Director of Educator Support and Higher Education at the Department of Education. I merely wanted to provide a little bit of information with regards to Part 4. The reason that we license post-secondary career schools is for student protection. As part of the requirements, they are the schools that are licensed are required to provide surety indemnification so that should they close suddenly or cease operation, the students don't lose their tuition money. And with regard to the exceptions that are listed in current statute, one of the key pieces there refers to training that is avocational in nature. Avocational in nature would be someone who runs classes on how to play the piano, right? Someone runs classes on how to take nature photos, for example, photography. Where it becomes vocational is if that school actually teaches classes to someone who can then go out and earn a living from that. So teaching someone how to play the piano is avocational. Teaching someone how to teach someone how to play the piano is vocational. So that's kind of the difference. And I think that's what you're looking at in this legislation is, are you talking about a yoga school that teaches people yoga or a school that teaches people how to teach yoga as a profession? And so I just want to make that clarification. And that's the difference between avocational and vocational and how we look at schools. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions, Senator Prentice?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony, Steve. So I guess my question for you is, if a state agency or a national accrediting body already has a program, requirements in place, and whether it's a yoga training program or an EMT training program, they meet those standards that are already set into public protection for, at another agency or national organization, accrediting organization. How are those, are those excluded here? Are those covered? Or are you saying they still have to be in your wheelhouse?
Yep, that's a great question. And the quick answer is it depends. But let me give you an example that I think is very telling and we'll get around to your answer, and I'll be as quick as I can be. We recently had a precipitous closure of a nursing school. You might have seen it on Channel 9. Yep. And that school was closed by the Board of Nursing. That school was licensed by the Department of Education as a post-secondary education institution, which means we required them to have surety indemnification. The Board of Nursing licensed them to teach nursing classes, and they were accredited by a national accreditor who looked at programmatic pieces, as did the Board of Nursing. None of the other entities, with the exception of the DOE, require surety indemnification. So you can be nationally accredited, you can be licensed in this case by another state entity, but there is no one looking at the student protection piece of this from a financial standpoint. And that's what we do here. So we're not looking at the programs of these schools so much as, are they financially sound? Are they protecting their students with a bond, for example, or a letter of credit? And in the case of the nursing school I mentioned, because of our involvement, there was a bond in place. We've now since been able to direct students to get reimbursement on that bond. So had we not been involved in this, those students would have lost their tuition money. So I hope that answers the question. Just because someone is nationally accredited does not mean that there is some type of indemnification in place. In fact, very often there is not, right? Accreditation tends to look at other aspects. They may look at financials, but they're not requiring indemnification as part of that accreditation process.
Just quick
Follow up?
follow up, just very quick, Steve. So what if they did have a requirement for indemnification, a national one? Would that be acceptable by the department, or would they still have to go through the process?
No, I think that would be very acceptable. Our concern is student protection.
Okay.
Financial student protection. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
So let's see, my question would be, you've seen the amendment, what they want to add under D. Is that something that you agree with or you don't agree with it?
Well, as I've mentioned in other committee meetings, Senator, thank you for the question. My opinions are my own, and where I'm speaking on behalf of the department. I can't say so much that I have an opinion, so much as the intent of the statute is to protect students who go to vocational schools, post-secondary schools, to learn a vocation. So in this instance, are we teaching yoga, or are we teaching people how to be yoga teachers? And that's the difference. If we're teaching them how to be yoga teachers, that's a vocation. And I guess if we extrapolate this out, there's also a matter of fairness to other schools that teach other types of vocations.
Okay, thank you. Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Appleby, for taking my question. So you gave us the example of the nursing school, and that the students there are now going to be able to get their tuition back. Have there been other examples of things like yoga in this instance, yoga schools that have closed and students have lost their tuition dollars?
Well, thank you for the question. That's a great question.
In New Hampshire. Thank you.
We only recently became aware of these types of schools existing. This is very recent here at the department, probably, I'm going to guess last August or September. We had a school reach out to us, maybe it was July, asking if they need to be licensed. We had no idea that there were schools that teach people how to be yoga trainers, I guess. Makes sense that there are, but we didn't know prior to that. So we had never licensed anyone prior. So that's the only information I have regarding yoga schools.
Just to follow up, so you don't have any examples of students who have lost tuition because the, whatever it may be, vocational school that they attend went out of business and didn't have a surety bond or a letter of credit?
Referring to yoga schools, I do not have any information.
No, referring to any vocational school that you may or may not be aware of.
Oh, okay, sure. So in the roughly 22 years I've been involved with this field, there have been instances of schools closing that were not licensed for one reason or another, and students have lost their money. And nationally, there are many examples of this occurring. Again, it's not a very often event. There are only about 75 or so licensed schools in New Hampshire, and most of them are extremely small. And I mean 1 or 2 person operations. And that's probably 60 of the 75 are very small. So that's, again, not a direct answer, but somewhat of an answer.
Senator Khan, and before you go ahead, I will have to ask Senator Hennessy to take over again because I'm being called. Okay, thank you.
Senator Khan, you're muted.
I am. So thank you for taking this question, but I guess I'm at this point just a little confused between what we have in the bill, what we have in a potential amendment, which I'm having trouble accessing while I'm still looking at the bill. and then your intention of trying to separate the difference between a class for enjoyment and a class for training an instructor of, that might go on to teach others. So are we going to get some, do you intend to provide some clarification for the committee as to what, I mean, as the administrator of this, that you could provide?
Thank you, Senator Khan, for the question. I'm happy to provide any information that the committee seeks. I guess I'm just a little unclear of what you're asking me to provide.
But it seems like you have clearly provided a separation between the action, the act of training somebody how to do, as opposed to how to teach, and that in that distinction here isn't yet made. And if that's a distinction that you think that this committee should consider, I guess to me, and I'm sorry Senator Ward isn't here, it's her section of the bill, yeah, I think it'd be valuable for us to have in writing how you would separate that in this part of the bill.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely, I can provide that in writing. I apologize. I wasn't quite sure where you were going with that, but I can provide in writing that distinction. Absolutely.
Any other questions for Mr. Appleby? Well, thank you very much for joining us. Are there any other speakers on section 4?
Yes. We have a couple more. Maureen Miller.
Welcome, Ms. Miller.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I am in support of the amendment as stated by Senator Ward for section 4. My name is Maureen Miller, and I'm the owner of Yoga and H, a yoga business that has led yoga classes, trainings, and events throughout New Hampshire since 2004. I've had between 200 and 300 graduates in the past 14 years. I had started my business in Concord, so I had my business there for 14 years, but I've lived in New Hampshire for more than 25. I'm here to tell you my story related to Yoga and H, but I'm also a leader in the yoga community in New Hampshire. And I know that I speak on behalf of many others when I share my concerns about the state of New Hampshire requiring yoga businesses to be licensed. It's important that the yoga community gives you information to help you understand the detrimental impact that this will have on small businesses. And some will not survive the significant change if we are forced to license. In fact, due to this financial impact licensing would have on my business, I have temporarily paused offering any events because the DOE was not allowing us to continue to run any events unless we were licensed. Okay, so I just wanted to say that in terms of small businesses, it's really important that we feel that we do not fall within the same purview as career schools that offer credit-based courses and degrees. In fact, our audience for yoga trainings are people who have been practicing yoga for some time. They're professionals who are not necessarily seeking to obtain knowledge to teach others. Some people who have taken my programs include professions such as doctors, nurses, physical therapists, social workers, waitresses, other small business owners, massage therapists, acupuncturists. And in fact, one of your fellow senators, not on this call, but at large in New Hampshire, has taken my program. So my point here is that the majority of people that take yoga trainings have a stated profession already. What I know from talking to people before they sign up for our programs is the main reasons that they take trainings are to deepen their personal practice and to share what they've learned with family and friends, and also to be in community with other experienced practitioners to take their practice, as I said, to a deeper level. And the majority of the ones who do not teach, the majority of people who take the programs don't teach, they don't open a yoga studio. The yoga business is not their primary or sole income. So they're not looking to do it. You know, when Steve was making the distinguishing between classes and trainings, they're not necessarily looking to take our what we call yoga trainings as part of something that they would do as a profession. So I think that's an important distinguishing factor. And also, we know as yoga businesses and small business owners that the New Hampshire Consumer Protection Act protects consumers. So for this, so when Steve was saying that one of the primary factors is to protect students, the Consumer Protection Program does that for small businesses. So again, during this time, especially this all started during COVID, it's just been a really challenging time for studios, for yoga businesses. A lot of them won't survive. And right now, I have paused my yoga trainings and my yoga business, and I've been statewide for 14 years. And that is because of the potential for having to be licensed. And I've gone and, got a traditional job, and I'm a finance director at a nonprofit organization. So I wanted to make sure that you all know that it's not something that we are doing to train people to go teach other people. Some people do that, but the majority do not. They're doing it to deepen their practice. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I have a lot of other information. I was I was the first school that talked to the Department of Education when they were beginning this process of considering licensing yoga schools. And one of the things that was said in those conversations is that if we brought this to a legislative committee who could make the difference to exempt schools, then they would support that. So I'm a little surprised by some of Steve's comments, because we thought that when we came here to make that exemption request, that it would not be something that they would oppose.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Will you take questions?
Absolutely.
So I have a question for you. So you said it's difficult if you were to be licensed. Can you just give us a ballpark of what the either time commitment of the licensing or the financial commitment it would take for a studio such as yours?
Right. So I looked at the paperwork when it was first requested that we license, and there was a lot of requirements from that perspective in terms of time, but also one of the things that was unsettling for me is that it was not around how we were training people, it was around the consumer protection, and I thought that was taken care of elsewhere. So that was the first thing. From the financial perspective, since I've owned my business in 2004, I have always had another job. I worked for UNH for 16 years. Now I'm working for a statewide nonprofit. And I do that because even as one of the more successful businesses in New Hampshire, it doesn't pay the bills. We do it to better the health and well-being of the community and the people that want to take our courses.
Thank you. I'm going to hand the gavel back to Senator Ward.
Any other questions from committee members for Ms. Miller? I don't see anyone. Thank you very much for your testimony.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Who do we have next?
Next, we have Shannon Roach.
Shannon?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I very much appreciate it. Senator Ward and members of the committee, again, thank you for affording me the opportunity to comment on this pending legislation. My name is Shannon Roach. I am president and CEO of Yoga Alliance, which is the nonprofit association serving the yoga community. We're proud to count many yoga teachers and teacher training programs as members in New Hampshire. We first learned about the state's new policy to require licensure of advanced yoga programs as career schools when several of our New Hampshire members turned to us for help. These members, who are New Hampshire small businesses, asked us for assistance after determining that the additional fees and other administrative items associated with licensure not only seemed inapplicable to their programs, but, and perhaps more importantly, would also be quite burdensome and potentially put them out of business. In fact, it would subject these programs to more burdensome regulations than the Consumer Protection Act, which does not require that businesses have indemnification in place in that way. The fact that the licensure requirement was only applied to yoga programs for the first time during the pandemic was also especially troubling to our members, given that yoga small businesses have been significantly impacted by the pandemic generally, and also by the unpredictability of state and local social distancing orders and participants' general reticence to congregate in group settings, even when it is permitted. In order to learn more from our members here in New Hampshire, we actually conducted a survey, and we learned that a licensing requirement would result in many of them stating that they would either have to postpone, if not outright cancel, any new yoga programs. In addition to the small yoga business owners you've already heard from, I'd like to share testimony from Stephanie Paolini of Portsmouth. Stephanie submitted her yoga program for licensure this year, and she asked us to share her comments with you today. They're as follows. Her program is called Three Bridges Yoga. She says, Three Bridges Yoga would like to extend its gratitude to the state of New Hampshire for waiving the fees in conjunction with the licensure of yoga schools for this year. We would also like to reiterate that the potential licensure fees for upcoming years would be severely detrimental to yoga studios and would hinder our ability to maintain the proper licensure that has been put into place as of October 2020. We would also like to let the state know that the timing of the licensure seemed inappropriate during a global pandemic and did not seem in alignment with wanting to keep local businesses afloat during an already difficult time to stay in business. Fees and new costs associated with the licensure aside, most people who attend a yoga training do not teach for a full-time job, in parentheses, meaning this is not their main trade, or people train for personal development, neither of which seems to fall in line with needing to register our program as a quote unquote school in the state of New Hampshire. Unfortunately, Three Bridges Yoga's final statement is if this licensure mandate continues, we will move our entire program to our York main location to avoid these fees. As stated at the beginning, 70% of our training is currently taking place at the main location, so it feels even less necessary that our school in particular should be required to register as a school in New Hampshire. So those were, again, the comments of Stephanie Paolini. I'll close with just a couple of points on behalf of the whole yoga community. First and foremost, the safety and quality of teaching yoga is at the heart of everything that we at Yoga Alliance do. Yoga Alliance credential holders are required to adhere to the standards within our credential, which include clear consumer protection guardrails. These include an ethical commitment, a standardized list of programmatic instruction in competencies such as yoga ethics, history, philosophy, asana, and practicum. We actually operate a public-facing registry so that the public can learn about yoga programs and instructors, and also could learn about any violations of those requirements so that we can make sure that the public is in fact, the public safety is protected. We also provide a wide array of business resources that help members serve their clients and students as they expect and deserve. Second, it's important that we do all we can to help keep yoga businesses serving the community. Yoga is a practice that improves both physical and mental wellness, and as such, it is vital to the well-being of the community. Neither the state nor the public will benefit should access to yoga be restricted due to burdensome requirements. Third, the majority of states have not attempted to regulate yoga programs as career schools. And in fact, 11 states have explicitly exempted these kinds of programs from career school licensure. This is largely because these programs are just not a good fit for career school regulations. As Maureen has stated, advanced yoga programs are for the vast majority of folks taken for personal interest, with professional full-time employment sometimes or often being a secondary consideration. Many of those participants have, other professions, other work, some of which they consider their full-time jobs, and many take advanced yoga training to participate in that community and to advance their own growth. Moreover, yoga businesses are in fact businesses and are therefore subject to the same consumer protection laws that are already on the books for every other type of business. And then for our training program members in New Hampshire, most of which conduct only 1 or 2 trainings per year in the state, as you've heard, these ongoing requirements to license would be detrimental, if not prohibitive, to their ability to continue. This, of course, is a small business issue, but in this particular moment in time, I also want to just note that it would reduce access to this source of wellness for residents of the state, the need for which is especially pressing in light of COVID's particular physical and mental impacts, which yoga is very well suited to support and to help. Thank you so much for your attention to this important matter, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions you have.
Any questions from the committee? I have a question. Are you aware of any other avocation that has been pulled under for considered post-secondary education that now requires licensing? Or is it just yoga?
I am not aware of another. There may be others who would want to comment, but I have not heard of anyone else who would be put in this position.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have Katie O'Connell.
Katie O'Connell, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is Katie O'Connell, and I own Dragonfly Yoga Barn, which is a studio and retreat in North Sandwich, New Hampshire. I have been practicing yoga for over 20 years, and I've been teaching yoga in New Hampshire since 2003. My husband and I relocated our 275-year-old New England barn here from a nearby town, piece by piece, in 2007, so it's a pretty unique business. And that was the same year that I finished my 15-year post as a public school teacher in the state. And after a year of rebuilding our antique barn, we opened up our yoga studio and have been operating as a small business in our little town of Sandwich for 12 years now. Locals and out-of-staters alike have often called Dragonfly the heartbeat of the community. I've heard that many times from not only my students, but people who live here in town. As we offer a variety of programs to serve our community, which include yoga classes, workshops, meditation classes and series, concerts, trainings, fundraising events, weddings. We guide yoga and meditation retreats here in the White Mountains and around the world. So I take people from here with me to other places as well. And it has always been a bit of a hustle to create programs that serve a broad population. And I have always worn many hats to keep Dragonfly's doors open. That has never been truer than today, as this month marks a full year since my physical doors here at Dragonfly have been closed to the public for classes, and we have operated almost entirely online. I am here today to express my strong belief that imposing licensure on yoga teacher training programs in New Hampshire will severely impact my studio personally as a small business and other studios that offer these life-changing studies in yoga. The financial burden of licensure, with its additional expenses and annual dues, not only puts the ability of studio owners to offer training programs themselves in jeopardy, but quite frankly, these fees also have the capacity to close the doors of small businesses like mine that piecemeal together many threads to make up what one might call a reasonable living in the state of New Hampshire, especially when it will already take us years to recover financially from the losses of this past year. You've already heard from my colleague Maureen Miller about her broad experience as a teacher and business owner in New Hampshire, as well as her timely decision to put her yoga business on hold and take a full-time job while the state deliberates the outcome of this bill. And I would second every note that she shared, as well as Shannon, and punctuate their points that most of our yoga students come to us after years of personal practice, and most often to deepen their own awareness of self, and that is a body, mind, spirit practice, when they elect to engage in a personal development program like the ones that our studios have offered. Those who go on to share yoga with others rarely leave another job or profession solely to teach yoga, as it is simply not feasible for most to do so. When I was first certified as a yoga teacher, I brought it back to my faculty at Interlakes High School, and I taught them for years before I left my teaching position and opened up my own studio. Additionally, many students who do study with us go back to their communities to offer yoga and meditation, sometimes by donation, often to underserved populations, at-risk communities, and even to colleagues at their real job like I did, where yoga can help alleviate stress, tension, and really to help knit people into fellowships that promote overall wellness. Our teachers have brought to their respective communities practices that can only be seen as enrichment and that serve as human spirit as well as boost our immune system. And after a year like 2020, as you've heard from my colleagues, I would argue that we need yoga more now than ever, and taking yoga schools out of this designation as a career program will certainly help us in that endeavor. I thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Senator Hennessy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony too, Katie. I have a question. You mentioned when you were certified to teach yoga, was this certification through a New Hampshire yoga studio like your own, or through another type of educational institution?
No, actually, it was through a program like mine, but it was not in the state of New Hampshire.
Thank you.
Senator Shardy.
Good afternoon. I really appreciate your testimony and the testimony of others. And as I sat here, I started thinking, I see your point, because how will you regulate things? For instance, there are boutique studios that are not yoga studios, but they do all different kinds of things, from bar to yoga to regular weight training. And they don't have to have these licenses or be regulated. So how would it even be attainable to regulate this?
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I run workshops in all different things that come under the umbrella of yoga, meditation. You know, we talk about subtle body, we talk about lifestyle practices, nutrition. We work together and really look at yoga as a lifestyle, as a pathway. And so I agree with you. Definitely, I agree with you on that, Senator.
May I have a follow-up?
Follow-up? Go ahead.
Yes. It's also just making me think, then wouldn't a dog grooming business then fall under this category? I just wondering if this, just questioning some of the language.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Ms. O'Connell?
I don't know enough about dog grooming or what that entails to compare to yoga, but sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, we're not colleges. We are not post-secondary schools. We do not offer degrees. We do not offer credit hours. It's just, it's very, I just think it doesn't fit our category at all.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I have a question, Ms. O'Connell.
Sure.
If you don't mind sharing, what is the licensing fee?
What is a licensing fee?
No, what is it? You say it's going to be very costly and very difficult to maintain a small studio with the licensing fee.
From what I understand, there are significant tiers of costs that will come to, you know, studios like mine that have schools. I understand that the schools that were persuaded this year to take on that licensing, those were waived because of COVID, but my understanding is that the initial fee is $1,000 and that each year after that it's to the tune of around $450 per year, and that does not include the fees that would come with site visits to check out your location, and you know, that is an annual fee that we're talking about.
Okay.
And just so that you know, in the training program that I have, I might have 8 students. It is not a large amount of money, and I run one program per year. So again, we are not a college. We do not, you know, we're not teaching hundreds or thousands of students at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for the clarification. Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Next, we have Steve Appleby.
Steve.
Thank you again.
Welcome back.
Madam Chairwoman and Senators. I just wanted to clear up a couple. There are some questions I heard throughout the testimony, and I just wanted to answer those. And I also wanted to, for the record, say that we do not support nor not support this amendment. I'm merely providing background as to why the relevant statutes exist around student protection. The licensing fee is $450 per year for schools generating $75,000 per year in gross tuition or less. Above $75,000, that fee becomes 0.006% of their tuition. So if a school did $500,000 in annual revenue, it would be 0.006% of the $500,000 would be their annual fee. There are no site visit fees. The other fee, though, that can be significant for a school is the indemnification piece. As schools seek indemnification, insurance carriers look at their financials and charge them bonding prices in accordance with the perceived risk to indemnify the school. So that is an ongoing cost that schools would bear, in addition to their annual license fee. This year, one of the governor's emergency orders, we were able to waive all initial and ongoing licensing fees for career schools, recognizing that they are small businesses. So that is in place right now. And so schools that have sought licensure this year have not paid anything, whether it be renewal or initial license fee. The last point I wanted to make is we do have, actually do have a dog grooming school, All Dogs Academy in Manchester, New Hampshire. Gail Fisher is the owner, and Gail has been licensed for many, many, many years. She teaches people how to be dog groomers, which is a profession. We also have an animal behavior school where an individual that owns that teaches people how to be animal trainers, professional animal trainers. We have bartending schools. We have hypnosis schools. So we have quite a range of different types of schools that, and when I send this clarification that Senator Connor and I spoke of earlier, I'll include a list of all of the current schools that are licensed so that the committee can get an idea of the scope.
That would be very nice. So all these other groups that you mentioned, the dog grooming, the professional bartending, they all have to be licensed, and they have to, it carries a yearly fee for them to belong to it or have the licensure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Appleby, for coming back to answer some of our questions that we had. When you mentioned the $75,000 in revenue, do you break out, for, say, for yoga studio, do you break out actual vocational revenue versus what you said, a vocational revenue? So I may go and take a yoga class, but I am not going to be taking a class on how to become a yoga instructor. Do you understand my question?
Yeah, I sure do. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. Our current statutes do not make that differentiation. So for better or worse, the moment you kind of cross that line into one vocational related student, you've now crossed that line into our world. And I can I'll just add one more piece. As we look around the country to how other states regulate these entities, it's really all over the map. There are some states that have no regulation whatsoever. And there are some states that it's easier to open a college, frankly, than a post-secondary career school. It really varies. And what I would mention is that most states that have tried to make the separation between vocational and avocational have a lot of trouble with enforcement and figuring out where to draw the line. Because now you're getting into, we would need to, how would we prove, right? We used to require tax returns of schools. We dropped that requirement a number of years ago because the department doesn't have expertise reading tax returns. So the question is, how would we go about proving it? Again, not supporting or not supporting, but just mentioning in practical terms an issue there. So, and I'm sorry if I went long.
So just to follow up on that, Madam Chair, is that okay? Okay, so you had said 0.006%. Did you mean 0.6% of revenue?
I'm sorry, let me pull up the fee schedule. 0.006, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said percent, 0.006 okay. Above 7.
So my accounting brain comes in this. So say someone has, when we're just taking a percentage of revenues, we're not actually concerned about if the school makes money or not. So if somebody has $200,000 of revenue, and it's mostly from yoga classes, not yoga instructor classes, and they have $200,000 of expenses, and we're going to charge them $1,200 to be licensed in New Hampshire for something that they may only have $5,000 in revenue related to vocational piece. I just have a hard time requiring this of somebody who may not even actually make any money on it.
Right. Well, again, the fee structure predates me and is designed to support the function of the office of the one full-time and one part-time person who oversee the statute and enforcement. But you just made a very, very telling comment, Senator, when you said they may not even make any money. Remember, student protection is our goal. So if a business doesn't make any money, that's a problem long-term, potentially for students.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Oh, I think Senator Ricciardi has a question.
It's just clarification for the right to know. My husband did come home. I'm no longer alone.
Good for you. Nice to have company.
Well, he's resorted to the basement so we can work.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? on
Senator
this
Ward.
particular- Yes.
Maureen Miller has raised her hand to speak for a second time on this part.
1 minute. Ms. Miller, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just want to mention that we were under the understanding that some of the program fees were per program. And I have a 200-hour program, a 300-hour program, a Reiki program, an Ayurveda program. I mean, I could list them, right? So it's per program is my understanding. At the graduates that I've had, 200 to 300, I haven't really kept track, but I know it's over 200. I've never had a complaint, and I have never stopped a program mid-program. We have had programs running 5 different programs around the state at the same time. Even during the pandemic, we did not stop it. We have not had to issue any refunds. We've never had a complaint around money. And again, students are protected through the Consumer Protection Program. I just want to reiterate that there's a widespread concern throughout the yoga community. You know, a lot of the careers that Steve mentioned, the programs that he mentioned lead to a career. This is not a career. Yoga teachers are not, that's not their career. I'm going to say more than 90% of them have something that they do that is a career, maybe even 95%. So I rest my case. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. What else, Sonia?
That is everyone for part 4.
Thank you very much. So now we can go to part 5.
If you'd like to speak to part 5, please raise your hand. Eric Frauworth.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Eric, at this point, I'm going to have to ask that you do not speak for more than 3 minutes because it's getting very late.
Oh, I was going to start with, I'm going to be very brief.
Good.
I just wanted to note in this particular section, it notes that one of the requests is that whoever is in my position makes a report to the advisory council regarding our ability to open CTE programs around recreation management. I have no problem with that section of the bill because we are already in the process of developing a CTE program in outdoor recreation management. And our plan is to work with Commissioner Caswell and whoever he hires into that position to make sure that the outcomes of our program meet the needs of the incoming employees they would have in that industry.
Great.
That's all I need to say.
Good. Good news. Any questions more on this from the committee? Okay. Who is next?
Amy Clark.
Ms. Clark.
Hello again, this is Amy Clark from the Department of Education, Bureau Administrator for School Safety and Facility Management. I think Senator Waters covered my concerns with this bill in section 6, 7, and 8 regarding the school building aid program and the public school infrastructure fund. So I won't go any further than that, but again, I'm here for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? On section 5? Okay. I don't see any.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you for your testimony, for your willingness to answer questions.
Madam Chair.
Senator Khan.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Ms. Clark, you administer the capital or school building program. It seems that the Part 5 is designed to assure that the criteria that's used for CTE funding remains that outdoor environmental education, outdoor education would qualify, but it has to meet the same criteria as everything else. I mean, is that the way that you're reading the bill?
Just for clarification, not CTE funding, public school construction funds. CTE funding is separate. Building aid only does not include CTE funding. So I think the intent is what you said. The way that it is written, I think there's some problems with it, which Senator Waters has acknowledged. So, but the intent there is that, I guess I will just say that we do not define what those educational spaces need to be used for. So to call out environmental education is a bit odd, because then we call out art and music, and there's really no need to call it out, which this bill does. We would already cover an environmental education space. So there's really no need for that.
If I could follow up. So there is no harm to providing that kind of direction in the bill, but there's also no priority to be given either. So you could, if it's there, it's just guidance to folks to think about if you're incorporating this and you had some expense of a facility in order to implement this requirement, you would cause that to be a part of a submission from a district, right?
I believe it's benign. There potentially, it seems obvious to us all right now, but later on down in the road, I don't know if it would preclude people from saying, well, does that mean that you don't cover this or don't cover that? I guess I can't say more than that, other than I think that it's benign, but again, I don't see that it's necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Bye-bye.
I don't see any other hands raised for Part 5. There was one other person who signed in to speak on the bill who hasn't raised their hand yet. It's Bethany Round, but I don't see her in the attendees. So if there's anyone else that wanted to speak to this bill that hasn't yet, now is the time to raise your hand. No hands, Senator Ward.
No hands. That means we're done with SB 148 and done with the hearing. And thank you to all the committee members for sticking this out. Oh, Senator Hennessy.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn, Madam Chair.
I was going to say a great thank you to the staff who has been sitting here the whole afternoon. Both
Yes, thank
Iva
you.
and Sonia. Yes, you may make a motion to adjourn, and I need a second. Seconded by Senator Prentice. Do I have to? Yes, I have to take a roll call. Senator Hennessy.
Yes.
Senator Prentice.
Yes.
Senator Ricciardi.
Yes.
Senator Khan.
I could imitate the Senator French, but yes.
And Senator Ward says yes. We are adjourned, and I'll see you on March 2nd.
And thank you to the public for hanging on who wanted to testify for so
I
long.
know.
Great
For
job.
anybody who wanted to contribute to the discussion. Thank you all, and have a